Yeah, it's actually working. Okay. My goodness. I just have to check now. The Goddess Test by Amiee Carter. For Dad, who has read every word, you are right. In memory of my mother. Prologue. How did it happen this time? Henry tensed at the sound of her voice, and he tore his eyes away from the lifeless body on the bed long enough to look at her. Diana stood in the doorway, his best friend, his confidant, his family in every way except by blood, and even her presence didn't help rein in his temper. Drowned, said Henry, turning back to the body. I found her floating in the river early this morning. He didn't hear Diana move toward him, but he felt her hand on his shoulder. And we still don't know? No. His voice was sharper than he'd intended, and he forced himself to soften it. No witnesses, no footprints, no traces of anything to indicate she didn't jump in the river because she wanted to. Maybe she did, said Diana. Maybe she panicked. Or maybe it was an accident. Or maybe somebody did this to her. He broke away, pacing the room in an attempt to get as far away from the body as possible. 11 girls in 80 years. Don't tell me this was an accident. She sighed and brushed her fingertips across the girl's white cheek. We were so close with this one, weren't we? Bethany, snapped Henry. Her name was Bethany, and she was 23 years old. Now, because of me, she'll never one. Fury rose up inside him and threatened to bubble over. Um, trying to bubble. I'm trying to find the place on the page. Uh, okay, maybe I accidentally. Okay, I've been going the wrong. Fury rose up inside of him and threatened to bubble over. But when he looked at her and saw compassion in her eyes, his anger drained away. She should have passed, he said tightly. She should have lived. I thought. We all did. Henry sank into a chair, and she was by his side in an instant, rubbing his back in the sort of motherly gesture he expected from her. He tangled his fingers in his dark hair, his shoulders hunched with the familiar weight of grief. How much more of this was he supposed to endure before they finally released him? There's still time, the hope in Diana's voice stabbed at him, more painful than anything else that had happened that morning. We still have decades. I'm done. His words rang through the room as she stood still next to him, her breathing suddenly ragged and uneven. In the several seconds it took for her to respond, he considered taking it back, promising he would try again, but he couldn't. Too many had already died. Henry, please, she whispered. There's 20 years left. You can't be done. It won't make a difference. She knelt in front of him and pulled his hands from his face, forcing him to look at her and see her fear. You promised me a century. You would give me a century. Do you understand? I won't let another one die because of me. And I won't let you fade, not like this, not if I have anything to say about it. He scowled. And what will you do? Find another girl who's willing? Bring another candidate to the manor every year until one passes? Until one makes it past Christmas? If I have to, she narrowed her eyes, determination radiating from her. There is another option. He looked away. I've already said no. We weren't talking about it again. And I'm not letting you go without a fight, she said. No one else could ever replace you, no matter what the council says, and I love you too much to let you give up. You're not leaving me any other choice. You wouldn't. She was silent. Pushing the chair aside, Henry stood, wrenching his hand away from her. You would do that to a child? Bring her into this world just to force her into this? He pointed at the body on the bed. You would do that? If it means saving you, then yes. She could die, do you understand that? Her eyes flashed and she stood to face him. I understand that if she doesn't do this, I will lose you. Henry turned away from her, struggling to hold himself together. There is no great sacrifice. That is no great sacrifice. Diana spun him around to face her. Don't, she snapped. Don't you dare give up. He blinked, startled by the intensity in her voice. When he opened his mouth to counter, she stopped him before he could speak. She will have a choice. You know that as well as I do. No matter what happens, she will not become that. I promise you. Diana gestured toward the body. She will be young, but she will not be foolish. It took Henry a moment to think of something to counter her, and when he did, he knew he clung to false hope. The council will never allow it. I've already asked. As it falls within the time limit, they have given me permission. He clenched his jaw. You asked without consulting me first? Because I knew what you would say, she said. I can't lose you. We can't lose you. We're all we have, and without you, please, Henry, let me try. Henry closed his eyes. He had no choice now, not if the council agreed. He tried to picture what the girl might look like, but each time he tried to form an image, the memory of another face got in the way. I couldn't love her. You wouldn't have to. Diana pressed a kiss to his cheek. But I think you will. And why is that? Because I know you, and I know the mistakes I made before. I won't repeat them again. He sighed, his resolve crumbling as she stared at him, silently pleading. It was only 20 years. He could make it until then, if it meant not hurting her more than he already had. And this time, he thought, glancing at the body on the bed once more, he wouldn't repeat the same mistakes either. I'll miss you while you're gone, he said, and her shoulders slumped with relief. But this will be the last one. If she fails, I'm done. Okay, she said, squeezing his hand. Thank you, Henry. He nodded and she let go. As she walked to the door, she too looked at the bed, and Henry swore to himself that this would never happen again. No matter what it took, pass or fail, this one would live. This isn't your fault, he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop himself. What happened? I allowed it. You aren't to blame. She paused, framed in the doorway, and gave him a sad smile. Yes, I am. Before he could say another word, she was gone. Chapter 1. Eden. I spent my 18th birthday driving from New York City to Eden. My computer is just so slow right now, and I don't know why. It's just frozen. Okay, now it's not frozen. It was frozen for like a few seconds there. Hi. Right now, I'm charging my camera, and I thought it would be a good idea to read something I've not read to you guys. So I'm reading a book series that is based on Greek mythology. Loosely. It's based on it, but it's also its own original story. Good. I was worried for a few seconds there because it actually froze up. Like I could see it on my end that it was freezing just a little bit. So I'm going to read this while waiting for my camera to charge. So I'll read a few hours. I don't know how many hours, just maybe a few for now. I spent my 18th birthday driving from New York City to Eden, Michigan, so my mother could die in the town where she was born. 954 miles of asphalt, knowing every sign we passed brought me closer to what would undoubtedly be the worst day of my life. As far as birthdays go, I wouldn't recommend it. I drove the whole way. My mother was too sick to stay awake for very long, let alone drive, but I didn't mind. I took 2 days, and an hour after we'd crossed the bridge to the upper peninsula of Michigan, she looked exhausted and stiff from being in the car for so long, and if I never saw a stretch of open road again, it'd be too soon. Kate, turn off here. I gave my mother a funny look, but turned on my blinker anyhow. We're not supposed to exit the freeway for another 3 miles. I know I want you to see something. Sighing inwardly, I did as she said. She was already on borrowed time, and the chances of her having an extra day to see it later were slim. There were pine trees everywhere, tall and looming. I saw no signs, no mile markers, nothing but trees and dirt road. 5 miles in, I began to worry. You're sure this is right? Of course I'm sure. She pressed her forehead to the window, and her voice was so soft and broken that I could barely understand her. It's just another mile or so. What is? You'll see. After a mile the hedge started. It stretched down the side of the road so high and thick that seeing what was on the other side was impossible, and it must have been another 2 miles before it veered off at a right angle, forming some kind of boundary line. The entire time we drove by, Mom stared at the window, enraptured. This is it? I didn't mean to sound bitter, but Mom didn't seem to notice. Of course it isn't. Turn left up here, sweetie. I did as I was told, guiding the car around the corner. It's nice and all, I said carefully, not wanting to upset her, but it's just a hedge. Shouldn't we go find the house? And here, the eagerness in her weak voice startled me. Right up there, craning my neck. I saw what she was talking about. Set in the middle of the hedge was a black wrought iron gate, and the closer we got to it, the bigger it seemed to grow. It wasn't just me, the gate was monstrous. It wasn't there to look pretty. It was there to scare the living daylights out of anyone who thought about opening it. I slowed to a stop in front of it, trying to look between the bars, but all I could see were more trees. The land seemed to dip in the distance, but no matter how I craned my neck, I couldn't see what lay beyond it. Isn't it beautiful? Her voice was airy, almost light, and for a moment she sounded like her old self. I felt her hand slip into mine, and I squeezed hers as much as I dared. It's the entrance to Eden Manor. It looks big, I said, mustering up as much enthusiasm as I could. I wasn't very successful. Have you ever been inside? It was an innocent question, but the look she gave me made me feel like the answer was so obvious that even though I'd never heard of this place, I should have known. A moment later she blinked, and the look was gone. Not in a very long time, she said hollowly, and I bit my lip, regretting whatever it was I'd done to break the magic for her. I'm sorry, Kate, I just wanted to see it. We should keep going. She let go of my hand, and I was suddenly keenly aware of how cool the air was against my palm. As I pressed the accelerator, I slipped my hand back into hers, not wanting to let go yet. She said nothing, and when I glanced at her, she was resting her head against the glass once more. 1/2 mile down the road it happened. One moment the road was clear, and the next a cow was in the road, not 15 feet in front of us, blocking the way. I slammed on the brakes and twisted the wheel. The car spun a full circle, throwing my body sideways. My head hit the windows as I fought for control of the car, but it was useless. I might as well have been trying to get it to fly for all the good I was doing. We skidded to a stop, miraculously missing the tree line. My pulse raced, and I took great gulps of air, trying to calm myself down. Mom? I said frantically. Beside me, she shook her head. I'm fine. What happened? There's a... I stopped, focusing on the road again. The cow was gone. Confused, I glanced in the rear-view mirror and saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, a dark-haired boy around my age wearing a black coat that fluttered in the breeze. I frowned, twisting around to try to get a proper look out the back window, but he was gone. Had I imagined it, then? I winced and rubbed my sore head. Hadn't imagined that part. Nothing, I said shakily. I've just been driving too long, that's all. I'm sorry. As I cautiously urged the car forward, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. Hedge and empty road. I gripped the wheel tightly with one hand and reached out to take hers again with my other, futilely trying to forget the image of the boy, now burned into my brain. The ceiling in my bedroom leaked. The real estate agent who'd sold us the house, sight unseen, had sworn up and down there was nothing wrong with it, but apparently the jerk had been lying. All I did after we arrived was unpack the essentials we'd need for the night, including a pot to catch the dripping water. We hadn't brought much, just whatever could fit into the car, and I'd already had a set of second-hand furniture delivered to the house. Even if my mother hadn't been dying, I was sure I'd be miserable here. The nearest neighbors were a mile down the road. The whole place smelled like nature, and no one delivered pizza in the small town of Eden. No, calling it small was being generous. Eden wasn't even marked on the map I'd used to get here. Main Street was half a mile long, and every shop seemed to either sell antiques or groceries. There were no clothing boutiques, or at least no place that could ever carry anything worth wearing. There wasn't even a McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, nothing. Just an outdated diner and some mom and pop store that sold candy by the pound. Do you like it? Mom sat curled up in a rocking chair near her bed, her head supported by her favorite pillow. It was so worn and faded that I couldn't tell what color it had originally been, but it had survived 4 years of hospital stays and chemotherapy. Against all odds, so said she. The house? Yeah, I lied, tucking in the corners of the sheet as I made her bed. It's cute. She smiled, and I could feel her eyes on me. You'll get used to it, maybe even like it enough to stay here after I'm gone. I pressed my lips together, refusing to say anything. It was an unspoken rule that we never talked about what would happen after she died. Kate, she said gently, and the rocking chair creaked as she stood. I looked up automatically, ready to spring into action if she fell. We need to talk about it sometime. Still watching her out of the corner of my eye, I tugged the sheet down and grabbed a thick quilt, arranging it on the bed. Pillows soon followed. Not now. I pulled the covers back and stepped aside so she could crawl in. Her movements were slow and agonizing, and I averted my eyes, not wanting to see her in so much pain. Not yet. Once she was settled, she looked up at me, her eyes red and tired. Soon, she said softly. Please. I swallowed but said nothing. Life without her was unfathomable, and the less I tried to imagine it, the better. The day nurse is going to come by in the morning. I pressed my lips to her forehead. I'll make sure she's all set up and knows what to do before I head to school. Why don't you stay in here tonight? She said, patting the empty space next to her. Keep me company. I hesitated. You need your rest. She brushed her cold fingertips against my cheek. I'll get more with you here. The temptation of curling up against her like I'd done when I was a child was too much to resist, not when every time I left her I wondered if it would be the last time I'd see her alive. Tonight I would let myself avoid that pain. Okay. I crawled in next to her, making sure she had enough blanket before I used the rest to cover my legs. Once I was sure she'd stay warm, I wrapped my arms around her, inhaling her familiar scent. Even after spending years in and out of a hospital, she still smelled of apples and freesia. She nuzzled the top of my head, and I closed my eyes before they started to water. Love you, I murmured, wanting to hug her tightly, but knowing her body couldn't take it. I love you too, Kate, she said softly. I'll be here in the morning, promise. As much as I wished it could be, I knew that was no longer a promise she would always be able to keep. That night, my nightmares were relentless and full of cows with red eyes, rivers of blood, and water that rose around me until I woke up gasping. I pushed the blanket off me and wiped my clammy forehead, afraid I'd woken my mother, but she was still asleep. Even though I didn't sleep well, I couldn't take the next day off. It was my first day at Eden High, which was a brick building that looked more like a large barn than a school. There were hardly enough students to bother building one in the first place, let alone keep it running. Enrolling had been my mother's idea after I'd missed my senior year to take care of her. She was determined to make sure I graduated. I drove my car into the parking lot 2 minutes after the first bell rang. Mom had gotten sick that morning, and I didn't trust the nurse, a round, matronly woman named Sophia, to take care of her properly. Not that there was anything particularly menacing about her, but I'd spent most of the past 4 years caring for my mother, and as far as I was concerned, no one else could do it right. I'd nearly skipped to stay home with her, but my mother had insisted I go. As difficult as the day had been so far, I was certain it was about to get worse. At least I wasn't alone in the walk of shame through the parking lot. Halfway to the building, I noticed a boy following me. He couldn't have been old enough to drive, and his white blonde hair stuck out almost as much as his overgrown ears did. Judging from his cheery expression, he couldn't have cared less that he was late. He dashed forward to reach the front door before I did, and much to my surprise, he held it open for me. I couldn't think of a single guy at my old school who would have done that. After you, mademoiselle. Mademoiselle? I stared at the ground to avoid giving him an odd look. No use in being rude the first day. Thanks, I mumbled, stepping inside and walking faster. He was taller than me, though, and he caught up in no time. Much to my horror, instead of passing me, he slowed and we were talking together. Do I know you? Oh, God, did he expect me to answer? Luckily, he didn't seem to, as he didn't give me a chance to respond. I don't know you. Brilliant observation, Einstein. I should know you. Right outside the office, he swung around, placing himself between me and the entrance. Sticking out a hand, he looked at me expectantly. I'm James, he said, and I finally got a good look at his face. Still boyish, but maybe he was older than I thought. His features were hardened, more mature than I expected. James McDuffie. Laugh and I'll be forced to hate you. Seeing no other choice, I forced a small smile and took his hand. Kate Winters. He stared at me for longer than it was strictly necessary, a goofy grin on his face. As the seconds ticked by, I stood there, shifting uncomfortably from one foot to the other, and finally I cleared my throat. Could you maybe... What? Oh, James dropped my hand and opened the door, once again holding it open for me. After you, Kate Winters. I stepped inside, drawing my messenger bag closer. Inside the office was a woman dressed head to toe in blue, with sleek auburn hair I'd have given my right foot to have. Hi, I'm... Kate Winters, interrupted James, falling into place next to me. I don't know her. The receptionist managed to simultaneously sigh and laugh. What is it this time, James? Flat tire, he grinned. Changed it myself. She scribbled on a pink pad of paper, then tore off the sheet and handed it to him. You walk. Do I? His grin widened. You know, Irene, if you keep doubting me like this, I'm going to start thinking you don't like me anymore. Same time tomorrow? She chuckled, and finally James disappeared. I refused to watch him go, instead staring down at an announcement taped to the counter. Apparently picture day was in 3 weeks. Catherine Winters, said the woman, Irene, once the office door closed. We've been expecting you. She busied herself looking through a file, and I stood there awkwardly, wishing there was something to say. I wasn't much of a talker, but I could at least carry a conversation, sometimes. You have a pretty name. She raised her perfectly plucked eyebrows. Do I? I'm glad you think so. I rather like it myself. Ah, here we go. She pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. Your schedule as well as a map of the school. Shouldn't be too hard to find. The hallways are color-coded, and if you get lost, just ask. We're all nice enough around here. I nodded, taking note of my first class, calculus, joy. Thanks, anytime, dear. I turned to leave, but as my hand touched the doorknob, she cleared her throat. Miss Winters, I wanted to say I'm sorry about your mother, I knew her a very long time ago, and well, I'm very sorry. I closed my eyes, everyone knew. I didn't know how, but they knew. My mother said her family had lived in Eden for generations, and I'd be stupid to think I could get away with coming here unnoticed. Blinking back tears, I turned the knob and hurried out of the office, keeping my head down in hopes that James wouldn't try to talk to me again. Just as I turned the corner, I ran directly into what felt like a wall. I stumbled to the ground, but contents of my bag spilling out everywhere. My cheeks burned, and I tried to collect my things as I mumbled an apology. Are you okay? I looked up. The human wall stared down at me, and I found myself face to face with a varsity football jacket. Apparently James and I weren't the only ones running late that morning. I'm Dylan. He knelt next to me, offering me a hand. I only took it long enough to sit up. Kate, I said. He handed me my notebooks, and I snatched them from him, shoving them back into my bag. 2 textbooks and 5 folders later, I stood and brushed off my jeans. That was when I noticed that he was cute, not just in Eden, but cute by New York standards, too. Even so, there was something about the way he looked at me that made me want to pull away. Before I could do just that, a pretty blonde girl attached herself to his side and gave me a once-over. She might have been smiling, but with the way she was leaning against him and clutching his arm, she might as well have peed on him. He was clearly marked territory. Who's your friend, Dylan? She said, tightening her grip. Dylan looked at her blankly, and it took him a moment before he wrapped his arm around her. Kate, she's new. Her fake smile grew, and she stuck out her hand. Kate, I'm Ava. I've heard so much about you. My father, he's a real estate agent, told me all about you and your mom. At least now I had someone to blame for the leak in my room. Hi, Ava, I said, biting the bullet and taking her hand. It's so nice to meet you. Everything about the way she looked at me screamed she wanted nothing more than to take me out into the woods and bury me alive. It's a pleasure to meet you, too. What's your first class? Said Dylan, craning his neck to look at my schedule. Calculus. We can show you where that is if you like. I opened my mouth to object, figuring there were no reasons to tempt fate more than I already was by continuing the conversation now that Ava was here. But before I could say a word, he took me by the elbow and paraded me down the hall. I looked at Ava, about to apologize for hijacking her boyfriend, but when I saw the flush of red on her cheeks and the clench of her delicate jaw, the words died on the tip of my tongue. Maybe my mother would outlive me after all. Chapter 2. Ava. I wasn't spectacularly pretty. I wished I was, but I was just me. I'd never modeled, never had guys drooling over me, and never looked like much of anything next to the genetically blessed socialites that attended my preparatory school back home, which is why I couldn't for the life of me figure out why Dylan was still staring at me. He stared at me all through history, all through chemistry, and all through lunch. I ate alone at the empty end of a table, my nose buried in a book, not wanting to bother with making friends. I wasn't going to be here for very long anyhow, so there wasn't much of a point. Once this was over, I had every intention of going back to New York City and picking up what few pieces of my former life I had been able to find. Besides, I was used to eating lunch alone. I hadn't had many friends back home either, since my mother had gotten sick at the beginning of my freshman year, and I'd spent all my time outside of school, camped out next to her hospital bed as she went through round after round of chemo and radiation. I hadn't left much time for sleepovers and dating and hanging out with people who couldn't possibly understand what we were going through. Is this seat taken? Startled, I looked up, half expecting to see Dylan standing there, instead carrying a cafeteria tray full of french fries and wearing a huge pair of headphones that hid his elephant ears. James stared back at me, his jaunty grin on his face. I didn't know whether to be horrified or relieved. Silently, I shook my head, but it didn't matter anyway. He was already sitting. I stared at my book, trying my best to avoid looking at him in hopes that he would go away, but the words blurred in front of me, and I read the same sentence 4 times, too aware of James to concentrate. Technically, you're in my seat, he said conversationally, reaching into his backpack. There we go. Just a moment. Okay. I'm just going to import some videos from my camera while I'm reading, and then once they're done importing, I can plug the camera back in to charge the rest of the way. It will soon show up, I think. I hope. Right now I'm trying to import some videos onto my computer. And I'll be doing that while I'm reading. Okay, it's loading them so I can go back where I was. Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out a full-sized bottle of ketchup, and my eyes nearly popped out of my head as I abandoned all pretense of reading. Who carried around a bottle of ketchup? He must have seen my look, because as he squirted it all over the massive pile of fries, he nudged the tray closer to me. Want some? I shook my head. I had an apple and a sandwich, but the arrival of James made me a little queasy. It wasn't that I didn't think he might be a sweet kid, I just wanted to be left alone. As an excuse to avoid talking to him, I took a bite of my apple, taking my time as I chewed. James started to dive into his fries, and for a few brief seconds, I hoped the conversation was over. "Dylan's staring at you," he said, and before I could swallow and make it clear I wanted nothing to do with Dylan, James nodded to something behind me. "Incoming." I frowned and twisted around, but Dylan was still sitting across the cafeteria. It didn't take long for me to see what he was talking about, though. Ava was headed straight toward us. "Great," I muttered, dropping my apple onto a napkin. Was it really too much to ask that I get through my senior year unscathed? And if that really was so impossible, couldn't I at least have a day to settle before all the drama started? "Kate?" Ava's high-pitched voice was unmistakable. I sighed inwardly and forced myself to turn around, plastering an innocent smile on my face. "Oh, hi, Eva, right?" The corner of her lips twitched. I bet no one had ever asked for her name twice before. "Right," she said, her voice dripping with fake enthusiasm. "I'm so glad you remembered. Listen, I wanted to ask, do you have plans for tomorrow night? Other than scrub bedpans, change my mother's sheets, and measure out her medication for the following week? I've got a few things going on. Why?" She sniffed haughtily, but then seemed to remember that she was trying to play nice. "We're all having a bonfire in the woods. It's a pet rally, sort of, except it's not, well, school-sponsored." She giggled and tucked a lock of blonde hair behind her ear. "Anyway, I was wondering if you wanted to come. I thought it might be a nice way for you to meet everyone." Glancing over her shoulder at a long table full of jocks, she grinned. "I know a few of them are really eager to meet you." What was all this about? She wanted to find me a boyfriend so Dylan would leave me alone? "I don't date." Ava's mouth dropped open. "Really?" "Really. Why not?" I shrugged and glanced at James, who seemed to be determined not to look at Ava as he built an elaborate teepee made of fries. He wasn't going to be of any help. "Listen," said Ava, dropping her fake act. "It's just a party. Once everyone meets you, they'll stop staring at you. It's no big deal. Just an hour or whatever, and then you won't have to do it again. I'll even help you with your hair and makeup and stuff. You can borrow one of my dresses if they're not too small." Did she even realize she'd just insulted me? I tried to refuse, but she kept going. "Please," she said, her voice cracking with sincerity, "don't make me beg. I know it's probably not what you're used to in New York, but it'll be fun, I promise." I eyed her as she gave me a helpless, pleading look. She wasn't going to take no for an answer. "Fine," I said. "I'll stay for an hour, but I don't need your makeup or your dresses, and after this you leave me alone, all right?" Her smile was back, and this time it wasn't fake. "Deal! I'll be at your place at 7. After I scribbled down my address on a napkin, Ava sauntered back to her table, her hips swaying outrageously as virtually every male eye turned her way. I glared at James, who was still focused on building that ridiculous hut. "Some help you are. She seemed like you were handling it." "Yeah, well, thanks for throwing me to the wolves." I reached over and took a fry from the plate, making sure it was the one that wasn't holding up the structure. It came toppling down, but James didn't seem to mind. Instead, he popped another fry into his mouth and chewed thoughtfully. "Well," he said once he swallowed, "seems you've officially made a date with the devil." I groaned. As I walked to my car, after the last bell had rung, James caught up with me, music blasting from the headphones that hung off his neck, but at least he was silent. I was still annoyed that he hadn't stepped in and helped me with Ava, and so I waited until I'd reached my car to acknowledge him. "Did I drop something?" I said, unable to think of another way to make myself clearer. I didn't want to talk to him. "What? No, of course not. If you did, I'd give it back." His bewilderment confused me. Did he really not understand? I lingered with my key in the lock, wondering how long this was going to last. Was it just for a day, or did I have to wait for my status as a new curiosity to wear off? I'd been stared at all day long, but no one but James, Dylan, and Ava had approached me. I wasn't surprised. They'd all known each other since diapers, and they'd carved out their groups since kindergarten, more than likely. I had no place here. I knew it, they knew it, and that was perfectly fine with me. "I don't date." The words came out before I could stop myself, but now that I'd said them, I had to keep going. "Even back home, I didn't date. I don't. It's nothing personal. I'm not making excuses. I really mean it. I don't date." Instead of looking disappointed or crestfallen, James stared at me with wide blue eyes and a blank expression. As the seconds ticked by, I felt my cheeks grow warm. Apparently dating me had been the last thing on his mind. "I think you're pretty." I blinked. Or maybe not. "But you're at least an 8 and I'm a 4. We're not allowed to date. Society says so." Eyeing him, I tried to figure out if he was being serious. He didn't look like he was kidding. and he was staring at me again like he expected some sort of answer other than a snort. "An 8?" I blurted. It was the only thing I could come up with. "Maybe a 9 if you put on some makeup, but I like 8s. 8s don't let it go to their heads. 9s do, and 10s don't know how to be anything other than 10s, like Ava." He was serious. I turned the key in the lock, wishing I had a cell phone so I could pretend someone was calling me. Okay, I can put 3 videos on my laptop, if it will allow me to select them. 1, 2, 3. Yay! Okay. "Well, thanks, I guess. You're welcome." He paused. "Kate, can I ask you something?" I bit my lip to stop myself from pointing out that he already had. "Sure, shoot." "What's wrong with your mother?" I froze and my stomach churned. I didn't say anything for several moments, but he still waited for an answer. My mother. Her illness was the last thing I wanted to talk about. It seemed wrong to spread it around like I was somehow spreading her around as well, and selfishly I wanted to keep her to myself for these last few days, weeks, months, however much time I had left with her. I wanted it to just be her and me. She wasn't a freak show they could stare at, some piece of gossip they could whisper back and forth, and I wouldn't let them do that to her. I wouldn't let them taint her memory like that. James leaned against my car, and I saw a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. I hated being pitied. "How long does she have?" I swallowed. For someone with zero social skills, he could read me like a darn book. Or maybe I really was that obvious. The doctors gave her 6 months to live when I was a freshman. I clutched my car keys so hard that the metal cut into my skin. The pain was a welcome distraction, but it wasn't enough to make the lump in my throat disappear, and she's been hanging on for a really long time. "And now she's ready?" I nodded numbly. My hands were shaking. "Are you?" The air around us seemed unnaturally heavy for September. When I focused on James again, racking my brain for something to say that would make him leap before I started crying, I realized that nearly all the other cars had left. James reached around me and opened the door. "Are you all right to drive home?" Was I? Yeah. He waited as I climbed into the car, and he gently closed the door behind me. I rolled my window down as I started the engine. "Do you want a ride?" He smiled, tilting his head as if I'd said something remarkable. I'd walked home every single day of high school so far, in the rain, snow, sleet, hail, doesn't matter. You're the first person to ever offer to drive me home. I blushed. "It's not a big deal. Offer stands if you want." James stared at me for a moment, as if he were making some sort of decision about me. "No, it's all right. I'll walk. Thanks, though." I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or to feel guilty for wanting to feel relieved. "See you tomorrow, then." He nodded and I put the car into reverse. Right before I took my foot off the brake, James was next to the window again. "Hey, Kate, maybe she'll hang on a little longer." I said nothing, not trusting myself to keep my composure. He watched as I backed out of the space, and when I turned onto the main road, I caught a glimpse of him walking through the parking lot. He'd put his massive headphones on again. Halfway home, I had to pull over and give myself time to cry. Mom spent most of the night hunched over a basin retching, and I spent most of it holding her hair back. By the morning by the time morning came and Sophia, the day nurse, showed up, my mother barely had enough energy to call in excusing me from my classes, and we both slept the day away. After another round of chilly nightmares, I woke up shortly after 4, my heart pounding and my blood cold in my veins. I could still feel the water fill my lungs as I struggled to take a breath, could still see the dark swirls of blood that surrounded me as the current pulled me under, and the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. It took me several minutes to calm myself down, and once I could breathe steadily again, I dabbed a bit of concealer under my eyes to hide the dark circles. The last thing I wanted was my mother to worry about me as well. When I went in to check on her, Sophia sat in a chair outside her door, humming softly to herself as she knit what looked like a half-puce sweater. She looked so cheerful that you would have never known my mother was dying on the other side of the door. "Is she awake?" I asked, and Sophia shook her head. "Did you attach her medication to her IV?" "Of course, dear," she said kindly, and I slumped my shoulders. "Are you going to the party tonight?" "How do you know about that?" "Your mother mentioned it," she said. "Is that what you're wearing?" I looked down at my pajamas. "I'm not going." It was an hour with my mother that I would never get back, and we didn't have many of those left together. Sophia clucked disapprovingly, and I gave her a dirty look. Wouldn't you do the same if she was your mother? I'd rather spend tonight with her." "Is that what she would want you to do?" said Sophia as she set down her knitting. "For you to put your life on hold while you wait for her to die? Do you think that's what would make her happy?" I looked away. "She's sick. She was sick yesterday, and she'll still be sick tomorrow," said Sophia gently. I felt her warm hand in mine, and I pulled away, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. "She'd want you to have a night to yourself." "You don't know that," I snapped, my voice quavering with emotion that refused to stay buried. "You don't know her, so stop acting like you do." Sophia stood and carefully arranged her knitting on a chair. "I do know that all she talks about is you." She gave me a sad smile I couldn't bear to see, so I looked at the carpet instead. "She wants nothing more than to know that you'll be happy and okay without her. Don't you think an hour or two of your time might be worth giving her a little peace and reassurance?" I gritted my teeth. "Of course, but nothing." She squared her shoulders, and even though she was my height, she suddenly looked much taller. "She wants you to be happy, and you can give her that much by going out tonight and making friends. I'll stay and make sure she's taken care of, and I won't take no for an answer." I said nothing, glaring at Sophia as my face burned with anger and frustration. She stared back, not giving an inch, and finally I had to look away. She didn't know how precious each minute was to me, and there was no way to make her understand, but she was right about my mother. If it would make her happy, I would do it. "Fine," I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. "But if something happens to her while I'm gone—" "It won't," said Sophia, the warmth back in her voice. "I promise it won't. She may not even notice you're gone, and when you get back, you'll have a story to tell, won't you?" If Ava had her way, I was sure I would. Chapter 3. The River. My last hope was Ava forgetting to pick me up, but when I reluctantly dragged myself to the porch 5 minutes after 7, I saw a massive Range Rover parked in the driveway, making my car look like a toy in comparison. My mother had still been sleeping when I had gone to check on her, but instead of letting me wake her up to say goodbye, Sophia shooed me away. By the time I left, I wasn't a happy camper. "Kate!" squealed Ava as I opened the passenger door, oblivious to my bad mood. "I'm so glad you're coming. You're not contagious, are you?" With effort, I climbed in and fastened my seatbelt. "I'm not sick." "Whew," said Ava. "You're so lucky your mother lets you skip." My hands tightened into fists and I said nothing. Lucky wasn't exactly the word for it. "You're going to love it tonight," said Ava, not bothering to glance in the mirror as she backed out of the driveway. "Everyone's coming, so you'll have a ton of people to meet." "Is James coming?" I braced myself as Ava slammed on the gas and the Range Rover lurched forward, taking my stomach with it. For a split second, Ava looked so disgusted by the thought of James showing up that I almost took my question back, but the look was gone as soon as it could come. "James isn't invited." "Oh." I let it drop. I hadn't been expecting James to come anyhow. He and Ava didn't exactly run in the same circles after all. "Is Dylan?" "Of course." Her cheery voice sounded as fake as her nails. And when I looked at her through the dim light of the car, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or jealousy. "I'm not after him," I said, in case she hadn't gotten the message yet. I meant it when I said I don't date. "I know," but the way she refused to look at me spoke volumes, and I sighed. I shouldn't have cared, but in New York I'd seen plenty of boys take advantage of girlfriends while eyeing someone else in the background. It never ended well. No matter how much Ava might have hated me, she didn't deserve that. "Why are you with him anyway?" For a moment she looked startled. "Because he's Dylan," she said, as if it were obvious. "He's cute, he's smart, he's captain of the football team. Why wouldn't I want to be with him?" "Oh, I don't know," I said. "Because he's a pig who probably only dates you because you're gorgeous and almost certainly a cheerleader?" She sniffed. "I'm captain of the squad and captain of the swim team." "Exactly." Ava spun the wheel and the tires squealed against the pavement as the car turned sharply. The image of a cow in the middle of the road flashed through my mind, and I squeezed my eyes shut and silently prayed. "We've been together for ages," said Ava. "I'm not going to dump him because some girl who thinks she's better than us comes along and tells me I'm being stupid." "I don't think I'm better than you," I said tightly. I just didn't move here to make friends." She was silent as we drove through the darkness. At first I thought she wasn't going to say anything, but when she did a minute later, her voice was so small I had to strain to hear her. "Daddy said your mom's really sick." "Yeah, well, Daddy's right." "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without my mom." "Yeah," I mumbled. "Me neither." This time she turned the corner. I didn't feel as if we were suddenly flying through the air. "Kate? Hmm?" "I really love Dylan, even if he's only with me because I'm a cheerleader." "Maybe he's not," I said, leaning my head against the window. "Maybe he's different." She sighed. "Maybe." Ava parked her gas-guzzling monster on the side of a dark road. Trees rose above us, and a moon cast shadows on the ground. but for the life of me I couldn't figure out where we were. There wasn't another car or house in sight. "Where are we?" I said as she led me into the forest. "The bonfire's in the woods," said Ava as she nimbly avoided the low-hanging branches. I wasn't as lucky. "It's not that far." Muttering a string of profanities under my breath, I followed her. This effectively destroyed my intentions of leaving early, and I'd be stuck here until Ava left unless I caught a ride with one of my many suitors. I made a face at the thought. I would have rather walked. "It's right on the other side of the hedge," said Ava, and I stopped. "The hedge? You mean the hedge around that huge property? You know about it?" Ava turned to look at me. "My mom told me." "Oh, well, it's where we have our parties. Daddy knows the owner, and he's totally cool with it." Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist into knots, and I remembered the figure I thought I'd seen in the rearview mirror, but there wasn't much I could do. Maybe she was telling the truth. She had no reason to lie to me, did she? Besides, as far as I knew, the only way past those hedges was the front gate, but we weren't anywhere near the road anymore. "How are we supposed to get in?" She continued walking, and left with no choice, I followed. "There's a stream up ahead. There's an opening in the hedge we can climb through, and the party's just on the other side." I paled, my nightmares of drowning coming back to me. "I don't have to swim, do I?" "No. Why?" She must have caught something in my voice because she stopped again to look at me. "I can't swim. I never learned how." It was the truth, but I also didn't want to tell her about my nightmares. It was bad enough I had to relive them at night. If I told Ava, I was sure she would only use them as ammunition against me. She laughed lightly, and I could have sworn her tone grew more cheerful. "Oh, don't worry. No swimming required. There are rocks you can step on and stuff that makes it easy to get in." I could see the hedge now. My hands were sweaty, and my breath was coming out in short gasps, and I didn't think it had anything to do with our brisk pace. "It's right up there." Ava pointed to a spot about 20 feet ahead of us. The sound of rushing water floated in the night air toward us, and it took every bit of willpower I had to keep following her. When we reached the stream, my mouth dropped open. It wasn't a stream. It was a darn river. The current didn't look very powerful, but it was strong enough to carry me away if I fell. And without much light to work with, it was almost impossible to see the stones Ava referred to. She'd been telling the truth about the opening in the hedge, though. It was small, as if the river narrowed just enough for the hedge to form over it. We'd have to walk on rocks and duck to get underneath, but it was doable without actually going swimming. "Follow me," said Ava in a hushed voice. Holding her hands out for balance, she stepped into the river, searching until I was careful. Looking up, the first thing I saw was Ava unzipping her skirt, her top already discarded. Underneath, she wore a bikini, the colors for leaving, shoulder, and flashed me a wide smile. "Don't take it personally. If Dylan didn't like you so much, we might even be friends, but I'm sure you can understand why this has to happen." "Why what has to happen?" "This." She stepped into the water and shivered. Apparently it was as cold as it looked. "Consider this a warning, Kate. Don't touch my boyfriend. Next time it'll be much, much worse." And with that, she dove headfirst into the river. Two things happened at once. First, I realized what was going on. She was leaving me here, knowing full well I was afraid of the water. There was no bonfire. She'd done this on purpose. The second thing happened. Instead of watching her swim away, I heard a sickening crack as she hit her head on a rock. The next thing I knew, Ava floated limply as she was being carried away by the current. I winced. The water carried her nearly 20 feet as I watched, but Ava didn't move. The blow must have knocked her senseless. "Good, no, not good," the moral part of my brain insisted. Not good at all. If she was really unconscious and not just dazed, then she would drown in the current didn't push her into the bank of the river. I mentally groaned. Let her suffer. Wasn't a very wide river. She'd come to her senses and find the edge eventually. But that do-gooder voice in my head pointed out that if something happened to her, I'd be responsible, and even if she had tried to pull a cruel prank on me, I couldn't bear the thought of something awful happening to another person in my life. I'd had enough tragedy for one lifetime. My body moved before my mind was made up. I might not have gotten very good at swimming, but I could run. Kicking off my heels, I closed half the distance between us before I'd even realized what I was doing. The current was strong, but I wasn't as fast as I'd first thought. I caught up to Ava quickly, skidding to a stop on the muddy bank. But then I had a whole different problem to deal with. The water. Images from my nightmares flashed through my mind, but I pushed them aside. Ava was in the center of the river and face down, which meant I didn't have time to wait for her to come closer. There were only two options: let her drown or jump into the river after her. Not much of a choice. Cringing, I entered the ice-cold water and splashed toward her, leaping sluggishly to keep up. My foot caught a rock and I fell in, drenching myself, and before I knew it, the current had me too. Panic rose up inside of me as soon as my head was submerged, but I was conscious, and even though I couldn't swim, the water wasn't deep. Unlike my nightmare, I managed to find my footing and push myself toward the surface. I struggled to reach Ava, and once I did, I grabbed her arm and yanked her toward me. My heart beat painfully fast, but I kept breathing as steadily as I could. I was going to kill Ava once she was awake, and if there was any justice in the world, she'd need stitches and permanently scar that pretty little face of hers. I pulled Ava toward the shore, out of the freezing water, relieved to be on dry land. Even though she'd only been in for half a minute, her skin was beginning to turn blue, and I turned her on her side, hoping that would help if she'd swallowed any water. "Ava," I said, kneeling down next to her. My teeth chattered. "Ava, wake up!" She was still. I leaned in closer, waiting for her to take a breath, but she didn't. I swallowed the lump of dread in my throat. CPR. I could do that. Roll her onto her back, palms against her diaphragm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I looked at her and waited. Nothing. If this is some kind of joke, I tried again. I wasn't giving her mouth to mouth unless I absolutely had to. It was then that I noticed the gash on her head. I don't know how I'd missed it before. Blood stained her hair scarlet, and I momentarily abandoned CPR to see how bad it was. It wasn't just a cut. My stomach twisted violently when I pulled her hair back to see the wound. Her skull wasn't round on the top of her head. It was flat. I shrieked and covered my mouth, seconds away from vomiting. Even in the dark, I could tell I wasn't just looking at hair and blood. Her scalp was exposed and part of it flapped open, revealing a crushed skull and bits of— oh God, I didn't even want to think about it. Quickly, my fingers went to the side of her neck, searching in vain for a pulse. My breath was coming in rapid gasps now, and the world spun as I automatically resumed CPR. She couldn't be. It wasn't possible. It was a joke, just some sick joke, where I was supposed to drag my sorry to the front gate and walk home. She wasn't supposed to be— "Help!" I yelled as loudly as I could, and hot tears streamed down my face. "Somebody help!" Chapter 4. The Stranger. Sobbing, I thrust my hands against Ava's abdomen. She couldn't be dead. 2 minutes ago she'd been telling me off for what? It didn't matter. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, taking a deep, shuddering breath. No, not possible. This wasn't happening. "Help!" I cried, looking around wildly, hoping for some sign of life. But all I saw on either side of us were trees, and the only sound I heard was the flowing river. If anyone lived on the property, they could have been miles away. I looked back at Ava, her face swimming as my eyes filled with tears again. What was I supposed to do? My shoulders shook and my body was useless. I stumbled backward, falling into a sitting position as I stared at Ava. Her eyes were open, unblinking and lifeless, and she was still as blood trickled from her head. It was useless. I drew my knees to my chest, unable to tear my eyes away. What would happen now? Who would find us? I couldn't leave her. I had to stay here until someone found us. Oh God, my poor mother. What would everyone say? What would they think, that I killed Ava? Hadn't I, in a way? If I hadn't agreed to go with her, then she would have never jumped headfirst into a river. "May I help you?" My heart skipped a beat. Standing beside me was a man. A boy? I couldn't tell, as his face was partially obscured by the darkness, but what I could see of him made my breath hitch in my throat. His hair was dark, and the jacket he wore was long and black, flapping in the cool breeze. I hadn't imagined him after all. "She's—" I couldn't finish. He knelt next to Ava and examined her. He had to see the same things I saw: the bloody head, the too still body, the angle of her neck, but instead of panicking, he looked up at me, and a jolt ran down my spine. His eyes were the color of moonlight. I heard rustling a few feet away. Startled, I twisted around, only to see a black Great Dane approach us, tail wagging. The dog sat next to him, and he scratched the dog behind his ears. "What's your name?" he said evenly. With trembling hands, I tucked my wet hair behind my ears. "Kate?" "Hello, Kate." There was a calming quality to his voice, almost melodic. "I'm Henry, and this is Cerberus." I could see his face clearly now that he was closer, and something about it looked off. He couldn't have been more than a few years older than me, 22 at the most, but even that was pushing it, and he was too beautiful to be out in the middle of the woods like this. He should have been on magazine covers, not spending his time hidden away in the upper peninsula of Michigan, but his eyes drew my attention. Even in the darkness, they shone brightly, and I had a hard time tearing myself away from his gaze. My friend, I said, my voice trembling, she's dead. He spoke with such a matter-of-fact tone that my stomach turned inside out. I threw up what little dinner I'd eaten, the horror of the evening hitting me so hard I felt as if the wind had been knocked out of me. Finally, once I'd finished, I turned back into a sitting position and wiped my mouth. Henry had arranged Ava so she looked as if she were sleeping, and now he was staring at me like I was some strange animal he didn't want to scare off. I looked away. So she is your friend? I coughed weakly, struggling to keep the sob bubbling up inside me from bursting. Was she? Of course not. Yes, I managed to say. Why? I heard the rustle of fabric and opened my eyes to see Henry placing his jacket over Ava, the way people covered dead bodies. I didn't realize friends treated each other the way she treated you. It was a joke. You didn't think it was very funny. No, I hadn't, but it didn't matter anymore. You're afraid of the water, yet you jumped in after her, even though she was going to leave you behind. I stared at him. How did he know that? Why? He said, and I shrugged pathetically. What did he expect me to say? Because, I said, she didn't deserve to die. Henry was quiet for a long moment, and he looked at Ava's covered body. What would you do to have her back? I struggled to understand what he was saying. Back? Back in the condition she was in before she jumped in the water. Alive. In my panic, I already knew my answer. What would I do to have Ava back? What would I do to stop death from tightening its chokehold over the remaining shreds of my life that it hadn't already stolen? It had marked my mother and was waiting in the wings to take her from me, inching closer every day. She might have been ready to give up, but I would never stop fighting for her, and like H, I was going to let it claim another victim right in front of me, especially when it was my fault Ava was here in the first place. Anything. Anything? Yes, can you help her? An irrational hope flared up inside of me. Maybe he was a doctor. Maybe he knew how to fix her. Okay. Okay, 65% means I can charge my camera probably another hour, maybe. Let's see, what time is it? So, okay. Finished. Um, uh, Charging. Okay. Kate, have you ever heard of the story of Persephone? My mother loved Greek mythology, and she used to read the stories to me as a child. But what did that have to do with anything? What? Yes, a long time ago, I said, bewildered. Can you fix her? Can you, please? Henry stood. Yes, if you promise me one thing. Whatever you want. I stood, too, daring to hope. Read the myth of Persephone again, and you will figure it out. He took a step toward me and brushed his fingertips against my cheek. I jerked away, but my skin felt as if it were on fire where he touched me. He placed his hands on his pockets, untroubled by my rejection. The autumn equinox is in 2 weeks. Read it, and you'll understand. He stepped back, and I stood there, confused. Turning to look at Ava, I said, But what about... I glanced up, and he was gone. Stumbling forward, my feet numb, I looked around wildly. Henry, what about... Kate? My heart leaped into my throat. Ava. I fell to my knees next to her, too afraid to touch her, but her eyes were open and she wasn't bleeding anymore and she was alive. Ava? I gasped. What happened? She said, struggling to sit up and wipe the blood from her eyes. You hit your head and... I trailed off. And what? Ava stumbled to her feet and swayed, but I reached out to steady her with trembling hands. All right? I said, dazed, and Ava nodded. I wrapped my arm around her bare waist to help keep her upright. Henry's jacket was gone. Let's get you home. By the time I crawled into bed that night, after scrubbing the blood out from underneath my fingernails, I'd almost convinced myself he wasn't real. Yet seeing him today and from the car earlier that week, it had all been my imagination. It was the only logical explanation. I'd hit my head when I jumped into the river, and in the car I'd been exhausted. Ava had been fine all along, and Henry was just a dream. That weekend, the phone rang on the hour, nearly every hour before I unplugged it. My mother needed her rest, and after what had happened, all I wanted to do was cut myself off from the world and keep her company. I didn't know who it was, and I didn't care. The freezing river hadn't done me any favors, and I slept most of the weekend away in the rocking chair beside my mother's bed. It was a restless sleep, littered with the same nightmares I'd been having nearly every night since coming to Eden, but now there was a new one. It went exactly as the night had gone, with Ava diving into the river and hitting her head, and me jumping into the water to save her, but when I pulled her body out of the river, it wasn't her face I saw, pale and lifeless as blood pooled on the ground. It was mine. I had to wear a surgical mask around my mother. I felt feverish and achy, and there was a deep cough in my chest that I couldn't shake, but someone had to take care of her. I poured medicine down my throat, hoping it'd make me feel better, and by the time Monday rolled around, I felt well enough to brave school once more. The moment I entered the cafeteria at lunchtime, James attached himself to my side, already holding his tray full of French fries. He dabbled on happily about a new CD he picked up over the weekend, and even offered to let me listen, but I shook my head. I wasn't in the mood for music. Kate, we'd taken our seats, and he had already drenched his fries in ketchup. You're really quiet today. Is your mom okay? I glanced up from my uneaten sandwich. She's hanging in there. Then what's wrong? The look on his face made it clear he wasn't going to let it go. Nothing, I was just sick all weekend, that's all. Oh, right, he popped a fry into his mouth. You missed Friday. I got your homework for you. Thanks. At least he wasn't pressing the issue. Did you go to that party with Ava? I froze. Was it that obvious? Was there something in my expression that I told him? No, it was only idle conversation. Kate? Terrific, now I knew something was wrong. I'm sorry, I mumbled, slouching. Did something happen at the party? There wasn't any party. No point in lying to him about that. He'd be able to ask around and find out anyhow, if he'd ever bothered to talk to other people. It was just Ava and a stupid prank. What sort of stupid prank? The way his voice dropped and his eyes hardened should have set off alarm bells in my mind, but I was too busy trying to come up with some sort of feasible reply. How was I supposed to describe the impossibility that had happened beside the river? There was no way he'd believe me. I didn't even believe me. And Ava, I mentally smacked myself. The whole thing had been a prank, hadn't it? Not only leaving me there, but smashing her head against a rock, and Henry showing up and pretending to do whatever it was that he'd done. He probably was someone's older brother, maybe even Ava's. But what about her skull? The way she'd stopped breathing? The angle of her neck? Could that really be faked? Speak of the devil, said James, eyebrows raised as he looked over my shoulder. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Kate, squealed Ava, and she sat down beside me without waiting for an invitation. I tensed, gripping my apple so hard I could feel the fruit bruise beneath the skin. Hi, what was I supposed to say to her? How was your weekend? She swung her legs underneath the table and sat down her tray of food. Unlike James, she had a chicken sandwich and a pile of tater tots. There was no possible way she ate that every day for lunch and managed to stay so skinny. It was good, rested and swam and stuff. She took a bite of her sandwich and didn't bother swallowing before continuing. I tried calling you, but you never picked up. Did my dad give me the wrong number? I nearly choked. That had been Ava? No, that was my house. I looked at James, silently willing him to say something, but he seemed to be making a very real effort not to look at us. I was sick, so I didn't pick up. You're feeling better now, though, right? I hesitated. Yeah, I feel better. Oh, that's perfect then. I was hoping you'd come over this week sometime. We've got a swimming pool, and I was thinking maybe I could teach you how to swim. I gaped at her. After everything that had happened, she wanted me to go swimming with her? I don't swim. After what had happened on Friday, I didn't want to go anywhere near a body of water ever again. It seemed unusually cruel to keep dragging a stupid prank out like this, and I silently wished she would drop it already. Ava pursed her lips, and it was clear that something in my voice or expression must have clued her in. No hard feelings about what happened, right? Maybe I was imagining it, but she seemed almost nervous. I mean, that's sort of what I wanted to talk to you about. Ava, I interrupted. Why are you sitting with me? Her face fell and she put down her sandwich. I broke up with Dylan. What? Why? I glanced at James again, but he was now engrossed in making a fry for it. I thought you said you loved him. I do. I did. Then why? Because, she glanced over her shoulder at the jock table. At least I have it as some pair of eyes were watching us. She lowered her voice to a whisper. You saw me, right? I dove into the river and hit my head, and the next thing I know I'm on the ground with a throbbing headache. I forced a nonchalant shrug. So you hit your head and I dragged you out before you drowned. No big deal. Yes, it is. Her voice dropped. There was blood everywhere. My mother saw me when I got home, and she had a fit. I had to tell her it was yours. But it wasn't mine. Our eyes locked. Hers were red and shining with tears. I know, she whispered. Kate, what happened to me? Across the table, James stilled, and I noticed he was no longer wearing his headphones. On top of telling Ava what had happened, now I'd have to explain it to him that she was gone. He wouldn't believe me. No one in their right mind would. I wasn't even sure I believed me, and I still wasn't convinced it wasn't all some elaborate hoax. Ava watched me closely, waiting for me to speak, and I knew there was no way I could lie my way out of this. Even if they did think I was crazy, the need to tell someone, to understand what happened, was overwhelming. I took a deep breath, kissed my sanity goodbye, and I told him everything. Once I was done, Ava stared at me, her eyes shining. Oh, Kate, you really jumped into the river to save me? I shrugged, and before I knew it, she wrapped her arms around me and buried her face in my neck. The hug lasted for nearly half a minute, things growing more awkward with each second that passed. Finally, she let me go, although her hands were still on my shoulders. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever done for me. When I tried to tell Dylan, she bit her lip. He laughed at me and told me to stop making stuff up. At the jock table, Dylan, surrounded by his friend, laughing loudly. Next to me, Ava looked crushed. So you broke up with him? I said. It doesn't matter, she said, picking at her sandwich. He'll be begging to get back together with me in a week. What about Henry? You really promised him anything? What did he want? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw James look up. I'm not really sure, I said. He asked if I knew about the myth of Persephone, and he told me that autumn equinox was in 2 weeks. He said once I read about her, I'd know what he wanted me to do. I've heard it before, but I don't get what that has to do with anything. Across the table, James dug through his backpack, tossing heavy books and binders onto the table. They landed with a thud, and half the cafeteria looked at us. I ducked my head amazed as I tried to figure out how all of it fit into his bag, but finally he yanked out a thick book I recognized as our English text. He flipped it open, seemingly at random, but when I craned my neck to see what he'd turned to, I saw it wasn't random at all. This is the story of Persephone, he said, pointing to a picture of a girl emerging from a cave. A woman stood on the grass, her arms open wide in greeting, Queen of the Underworld. The Underworld, said Ava, leaning over to get a better look. Which one? James gave her a look that could have withered a plant. The one where the dead go. Tartarus? The Elysian Fields? Greek mythology, I said, turning the page. See this guy? I pointed to a dark-haired man half covered in shadow. He's Hades, god of the underworld, ruler of the dead. Like Satan, said James. No, not like Satan, said Ava. There was a hint of anger in her voice, but James either didn't notice or didn't care. Satan's Christian, and the underworld isn't hell. Hades isn't a demon. He's just some guy who is put in charge of dealing with the souls of the dead. He sorts them out and stuff. I stared at her. I thought you didn't know anything about this. She shrugged and looked down at the book. Might have heard a few things before. He kidnapped her, said James in a voice so low it sent a shiver down my spine. She was playing in a field, and he dragged her down to the underworld with him to be his wife. She refused to eat, and while her mother Demeter appealed to Zeus, king of the gods, the world grew cold. Eventually Zeus made Hades give Persephone back, but by then she'd eaten a few seeds, and he insisted it was meant she had to spend part of the year with him. So whenever she's with him, as his wife, winter comes. It's the myth that explained the seasons to the Greeks. The temperature felt as if I'd dropped 20 degrees. A horrible thought crossed my mind, and I stared at James, trying to figure out if the implications of the deal I'd made with Henry were even remotely possible. Ava, on the other hand, snorted loudly. So he was lonely. It doesn't make him a bad guy. If she wanted to go down there with him, she might have. I ignored her and looked at James. Do you think Henry's going to try the same thing on me? That's ridiculous, said Ava, rolling her eyes. If he was going to kidnap you, he'd have already done it, right? It's not like he didn't have the chance when we were in the woods. I don't know, said James. It's possible. Maybe he's waiting for the autumn equinox to do it. It's just a few weeks away, at the end of September. He stared at me, blue eyes so wide I wondered if they were going to fall out of his head. What if he wants you to stay with him during the winter? "You can't really expect me to drop everything and move in for a while," I said uncertainly, "or permanently." "He might not ask," said James. "What happens then?" Silence settled between the three of us, with only the buzz of the cafeteria around us. Finally I straightened my shoulders and said with as much conviction as I could, "Then I'll kick his, and the police will arrest him. End of story." But it wasn't the end, because none of us were mentioning what happened on the bank of the river. It somehow brought Ava back from the dead, and I didn't know how to explain it. James slammed the book shut, and I jumped. "Maybe so," said James, "but it doesn't change the fact that you agreed to marry a complete stranger." Chapter 5: The Equinox. For the next 2 weeks I had one option: forget about the deal I'd made, write it off as ridiculous, and move on with my life. Even if I'd had any other choice, my mother's health sure made sure that all of the attention was focused on her. But James and Ava wouldn't let me forget it. With each day that passed, they argued in hushed whispers across the lunch table, sometimes seeming to forget I was even there. James seemed determined to talk me out of it, pointing how little I knew about Henry, and how he had to be a few colors short of a rainbow to even think about inviting me to stay with him for the half of the rest of my life. But for every flaw in the deal that James brought up, Ava countered. She defended Henry relentlessly, even though none of us knew anything about him, but it was easy enough to figure out why. Without Henry, she'd be dead. Of course she felt some amount of loyalty toward him. They dissected the myth, both borrowing heavily from it to give weight to their argument, and asked me repeatedly to tell them exactly what Henry had said, but there was only so much information I could give them. Part of me worried, and counted the days with them, but most of me was too focused on my mother to care. The nightmares also continued, leaving me with only a few hours of sleep at night. But no one commented on the dark circles around my eyes. Eden was a small town, and they all knew about my mother. A few days before the beginning of autumn, I came home to find her sitting in the middle of the weed-choked garden, and a knot of panic formed in my throat. Scrambling out of my car, I hurried to her side, kneeling next to her so I could get a good look at her face. "Mom," I said, my voice choked with worry, "you should be inside resting." How did she even have the energy to do this? I glared at Sophia, who sat on the porch knitting. Sophia shrugged. She insisted. "I'm fine. Slept all day," said Mom, waving me away, but not before I could get a good look at her. Her skin was pale and paper-thin, but there was a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there the past few weeks. "Come on," I said, taking her elbow gently and trying to guide her upward. She stubbornly remained sitting, and I was too afraid of hurting her to put much force behind it. "Just another few minutes," she said, looking up at me pleadingly. "I haven't spent time outside in ages. The sun feels wonderful." I dropped back down to my knees. There was no point in arguing with her anymore. "Do you need any help?" I made a face at the tangled bed of weeds. How long had it been since anyone had tended to it? Her expression brightened considerably at my offer. "I don't need any, but I'd like some. Just start tugging." It was dirty work, but together we continued to weed out the small clearing she'd already managed to create. I didn't want to think about how long she'd been out here. She didn't have the energy to waste on this sort of thing, but when my mother set her mind to something, there was no talking her out of it. "I'll be back in a few minutes," said Sophia from the porch, and she ambled inside, closing the door behind her and leaving us alone. I watched my mother out of the corner of my eye, and I yanked out a weed that was nearly half as tall as I was. At the first sign of trouble, I was taking her inside, but she hadn't been this energized and lucid in days. I hadn't told her about what had happened at the party, not wanting to worry her, but with the autumn equinox approaching and James and Ava at odds with each other, I found I wanted to tell her, if not the whole story, but at least something. I'd never kept anything like this from her before, and I wouldn't have many more chances to talk to her about it. "Mom," I said hesitantly, "you know Eden Manor?" "Of course." The crease in the middle of her forehead deepened as she tugged at particularly stubborn weed. "What about it?" I gripped the base of the stem below her fist and helped. After we tugged together, it came loose with a shower of dirt. "Does someone named Henry live there?" She straightened, not bothering to hide her surprise. "Why do you ask?" "Because." I shifted uneasily on the grass, my knees already starting to ache. I knew I should have told her that she'd want to know, but what if she tried to do something about it? What if I scared her and it hurt her? So I lied. "Some kids at school were talking," I said, unable to look at her as guilt gnawed at me. I never lied to her unless I had to. "I just wondered if you knew anything about him." Her shoulders slumped, and she reached forward to tuck a loose lock of long hair behind my ear. "If you insist on bringing up difficult subjects, can we at least talk about what's going to happen when I die?" I was on my feet in an instant, all thoughts of Henry flying out of my head. "It's time to go inside." Her eyes narrowed. "I'll go inside when you agree to talk to me." "I am talking to you," I said. "Please, Mom, you're going to make yourself worse." She smiled humorlessly. "I don't see how. Are you going to talk to me about it or not?" I closed my eyes, ignoring the sting of tears. This wasn't fair. We still had to have some time left, right? She'd made it this far, surely she could make it a few more months. Christmas, I thought. Just one more Christmas together, and then I could accept saying goodbye. I'd made the same deal for the past 4 years, and so far I'd worked. I don't want you to miss me, she said. You should live your own life, sweetie, and not be weighed down by me anymore, especially once I'm gone. My throat felt rough and didn't say anything. I didn't know how to live my own life. Even back in New York, she'd been my best friend, my only friend for the past 4 years. What did she expect me to do? Pack up and move on? And I want you to fall in love and start your own family. One that'll stick around a lot longer than I did. She reached out to take my hand, squeezing it gently. Find someone who will be good to you and never let him go, all right? I felt like I was drowning. Mom, I choked. I don't know how to do any of that. She smiled up at me sadly. No one does, Kate. Not at first. But you're ready for this. I promise you. I did everything I could. For a moment she trailed off and looked at our joined hands. You are ready, and you will be great, sweetheart. You're going to do the impossible. I can feel it, and even if you don't think I'm there with you, I'll always be. I'm never going to leave you. Remember that, okay? Sometimes it might feel like I'm gone, but I'll always be there when you need me the most. I wiped my hands with my eyes with my free hand, my grip on her tightening. Something inside of me was crumbling faster than I could glue it back together, and I didn't know what to do anymore. I couldn't imagine life without her in it, and I didn't want to either, but it was a reality I'd be facing far sooner than I was prepared for. I wanted her, my mother, not a memory. Promise me you'll be yourself and do what makes you happy, no matter what, she said, taking my hand in both of hers. You're meant for great things, sweetie, but the more you struggle against who you are, the harder it will be. Whatever obstacles you face, remember you can get through anything if you want so badly enough, and you will. She smiled, and whatever was left standing inside of me broke. You're so much stronger than you think you are. Do you promise me you'll try to be happy? I wanted to tell her that I didn't know how to be happy without her, that I didn't know who I was when she wasn't there, and I wasn't strong enough to do this, but her pleading look was too much for me to take, so I lied a second time. Okay, I mumbled, I promise. Her smile only made me feel guiltier. Thank you, she said. It'll be easier to go, and I know you'll be okay. I helped her to her feet, not trusting myself to speak, leaving the uprooted weeds abandoned in the middle of the lawn. I brushed the dirt off her knees and carried her into the house, wishing with all my might that she had never had to go in the first place. The next day, as the teacher droned on about conjuring irregular French verbs, the door to the classroom opened and Irene from the front office stepped inside. Every head, including mine, turned to stare at her, but the only person she looked at was me. Feeling as if my insides had turned to liquid, I stood, able to sense James and Ava's stares burning into the back of my head. I stumbled across the length of the classroom, ignoring the whispers that followed. Kate, said Irene, in a gentle voice once we were in the hallway, and the door to the classroom was closed firmly behind me. Your mother's nurse called. The walls spun around me, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Is she dead? No, said Irene, and a relief flooded through me. She's in the hospital. Without another word, I turned around and ran down the hallway. Class forgotten. The only thing I wanted was to get to the hospital before it really was goodbye. Kate? I was in late in the afternoon, and I sat in the waiting room of the hospital exhausted. I'd spent the past 3 hours alone and flipping through a stack of magazines without reading a word, waiting for the doctors to come tell me how she was. James, I stood on wobbly legs and hugged him as if my life depended on it. It lasted longer than it was strictly necessary, but I needed to feel his warm arms around me. It had been a long time since I'd hugged someone who wasn't frail. My mother's sick and they're not telling me. I know, he said. Irene told me. What if this is it? I said, burying my face in his chest. I didn't even get to say goodbye. I didn't get to tell her that I loved her. She knows, he murmured, running his fingers through my hair. I promise she knows. He spent the next few hours with me, only disappearing to get us something to eat, and he was next to me when the doctor finally came and told me what I'd feared. My mother had slipped into a coma, and it wouldn't be long now. James stayed by my side when I went in to see my mother, who looked so small and fragile, lying in the middle of the hospital bed, her body connected to more machines and monitors than I could count. Her skin was ashen, and even if the doctor hadn't told me, I knew she wasn't going to last much longer. Mentally, I went over everything that happened the day before, hating myself more each time I thought about how I'd let her stay out and garden. Maybe if she hadn't exerted herself like that, she'd still be hanging on, now lying there inside of that dying body. There was no sign of her. This wasn't how I wanted to remember my mother, as a lifeless shell of who she'd once been, but I couldn't let go. Shortly before 10, a nurse came in and told me that visiting hours were over. Several minutes later, when I still couldn't make myself leave, James stepped beside me. Kate. I felt his hand on my back and tensed. The sooner you get some sleep, the sooner you can come back and see her in the morning. Come on, I'll drive you home. I'm not home anymore, I said hollowly, and I allowed him to lead me away. I stared out the window as he drove my car back to Eden, grateful that he didn't try to start a conversation. Even if he had, I wasn't so sure I'd have been able to answer. It wasn't until we sat in my driveway, the engine of the car still running, that James spoke. In the background, a song played so softly on the radio, I had to strain to make it out. I was stalling. I didn't want to go back inside that house. I'd prepared myself for what was coming for years, but now that it was happening, I couldn't stand the thought of being alone. Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine, I lied. James smiled sadly. I'll come by and pick you up tomorrow morning, first thing. I'm not going to school. I know. He didn't take his eyes off me. I'll take you to the hospital. James, you don't have to do that. Isn't that what friends do? It hurt to hear the uncertainty in his voice. You're my friend, Kate, and you're miserable. What could possibly be more important than taking care of you? I need to go really quick and make sure that that's not the vent. That sounded like the vent. It's okay. Okay. Let me go back. I don't know what page I was on now. I stared out the window as he drove my car back to Eden, grateful he didn't try to start conversation. Even if he had, I wasn't so sure I'd been able to answer. It wasn't until we sat in my driveway okay. I'd prepared myself for what was coming for years, but now that it was happening, I couldn't stand the thought of being alone. Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine, I lied. James smiled sadly. I'll come by and pick you up tomorrow morning, first thing. I'm not going to school." "I know." He didn't take his eyes off me. "I'll take you to the hospital. James, you don't have to do that. Isn't that what friends do?" It hurt to hear the uncertainty in his voice. "You're my friend, Kate, and you're miserable. What could possibly be more important than taking care of you?" My chin trembled, and it was only a matter of time before the waterworks started. Not knowing what else to do, I leaned over the driver's seat and wrapped my arms around him. I'd never had a friend like him, someone who would have given up their day to keep me company at my dying mother's bedside. I'd come to Eden expecting to be alone when this was over, and instead I'd found James. If there was ever a reason to stay in Eden, it was him. "At least take the car," I said into his shoulder. "You shouldn't walk home in the dark like this." He started to protest, but I pulled back and gave him a look, and he nodded. "Thanks." By the time I managed to pry myself away from him and exit the car, I was a tearful, snotty mess, and I didn't care. Next to the sidewalk, I could see the bare patch of dirt in the garden and the pile of weeds still sitting on the lawn. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying from the driveway. I nodded, unable to speak, and waved goodbye to him, using the last of what little strength I had left to force a smile. I stepped inside, my hands trembling, but I knew there was no point in being afraid of an empty house. No matter how strongly my mother's scent lingered, I would be living alone for a very long time. Wandering listlessly through the halls, I ran my hand across each surface I passed, staring blankly ahead into the darkness. Tonight marked the end of the only chapter of my life I'd ever known, and I didn't know how to live in the emptiness ahead. When midnight came and the doorbell rang, I was curled up in my mother's bed, still wearing my clothes from that day. It took me 2 rings to decide to answer it, and even then, I took my time rolling out of bed and making my way down the stairs. Clutching my mother's pillow to my chest, I opened the door, expecting it to be James. It was Henry. My stomach dropped to my knees, and the fog that clouded my head evaporated. "Hello, Kate." His voice was like honey, and I was suddenly acutely aware of how awful I looked. "Do you remember me?" "How could I possibly forget?" "Yeah," I said hoarsely. "You're Henry." "I am." There was something sad behind his smile, something I related to all too well. "This is my valet, Walter." I eyed the second man, my hand still gripping the doorknob. He was older, his hair gray and skin wrinkled, and his pale face was drawn. "Hi," I said uncertainly. "Hello, Miss Winters." He smiled warmly. "May we come in?" There was no point in worrying about whether or not they were here to kidnap me. Ava was right. If that was Henry's plan, I would have been in the back of a van with my hands duct-taped together by now. Besides, it didn't matter anymore. With a nod, I opened the door wide enough for them to enter. I nervously led them into the living room. After flipping on the lights, I sat down in the armchair, giving them both no choice but to sit on the couch. Henry took a seat, as if he'd been here 1,000 times before, and in the light it was easier to see his face. He looked as young and gorgeous as before. "Do you know what day it is?" I wasn't even sure what month it was anymore, but there was only one reason Henry would show up on my front porch. "It's the autumn equinox, right?" "Very good," said Henry. "Did you read up on Persephone?" My mouth went dry, and I nodded. "Are you prepared to uphold your end of our bargain?" I looked back and forth between them, uncertainly. Maybe they were here to kidnap me after all. "I'm not really sure what our bargain is." Walter was the one who spoke. "In exchange for the life of your friend, you have agreed to spend the autumn and winter at Eden Manor. Every autumn and winter, if things go as planned." I stared at him. "Excuse me?" "As our honored guest, of course," he added. "You will be treated with the utmost care and respect, and you will have everything you could ever ask for." "Wait." I stood too quickly, and the blood rushed to my head. I fought off the dizziness, refusing to stumble in front of them. "You mean for the rest of my life? I have to spend 6 months with you? That was our deal?" "Yes," said Henry. He raised a hand to silence Walter, and he too stood. "I am aware it will not be easy, and you will face certain challenges, but I assure you that I will do everything I can to ensure you are safe and happy. For the other 6 months a year, you may do whatever you wish. You may have an entirely separate life, if you would like. You will have complete freedom, and while you are with me, you will be treated like a queen. I will do everything in my power to make you happy." He was dead. "Queen?" I said, spitting the word out bitterly. "You mean you want me to be your wife?" Henry frowned. "I am not proposing marriage to you, Kate. With your mother's death, you will soon have nothing holding you here, and I am offering you a chance at life you cannot possibly imagine." I bristled. "How did he know about my mother?" "What do you get in return? I'm not going to sleep with you if that's where you're going with this. I'm not that kind of person." He and Walter exchanged amused glances. "I assure you that all I want is the pleasure of your company, the platonic sort." Somehow I didn't think that was all he was getting, but there was no point in even pretending it was an option. I wasn't about to spend 6 months of the rest of my life with a stranger, no matter what he offered me. No, I said. Thank you for your offer, but you're crazy and no. Now, if you don't mind, I have to sleep. They didn't argue. Walter stood to join Henry and me, and I led them both to the front door, holding it open so they had to excuse to linger. As Henry exited, he stopped, his body less than a foot away from mine. He really was beautiful, and with him so close, it was hard to remember exactly why spending 6 months with him would be such a bad thing. Do you understand what will happen if you do not uphold your end of our deal? Ah, right, because no matter how gorgeous he was still crazy. I don't know and I don't care, I said firmly. Now please leave. I will give you until midnight, he said, joining Walter on the front path. But I am afraid I cannot wait any longer. Don't be so quick to dismiss my offer, Kate. This is the only time I will make it. Instead of answering, I slammed the door shut, trying to ignore how violently my hands were shaking. James came by the next morning, and he was nice enough to bring me a bagel. I picked at it as we drove to the hospital, my appetite non-existent. Luckily, he didn't make me talk. As I sat by my mother's bedside, holding her hand, a traitorous thought crept into my mind. If Henry had saved Ava, if it really hadn't been my imagination or some horrible prank, could he save my mother too? I pushed the idea away. I couldn't afford to think like that, not when I had to prepare myself for the end that was coming. Besides, what Henry had done was impossible. A fluke or a trick of the light, or some horrible joke that Ava still hadn't confessed to. Wherever it was, my mother was on death's door, and no magic trick was going to save her. She'd held on years longer than she should have, and I knew I should be grateful for the time I had with her, but watching her slip away as the hours passed made it impossible. It wasn't until that evening, as we walked slowly through the hospital parking lot, that I finally told James what happened that morning. He was silent as I finished the story, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his black jacket. You mean they just showed up like that, no warning or anything? I nodded, too empty to think much about it anymore. They weren't rude about it, I guess, but it was just weird. He opened the car door for me, and I lowered myself into the passenger seat. It wasn't until he sat down in the driver's seat that he spoke. You can't go, Kate. I wasn't planning on it. She'd never leave me if I were like this. Good, he said. We drove through the parking lot, and in front of us the sun was setting. I blocked my eyes, and I tried to find the courage to voice what I wanted to say all day. What if he can save my mother? He scowled. What else would he demand from you in order to do it? Whatever it was, it'd be worth it, I said quietly, if it meant she'd be alive. James reached across the seat to set his hand over mine. I know it would be, but sometimes all we can do is say goodbye. My face grew hot and my vision blurry, and I turned away from him to stare blankly at the window. What do you think will happen when I don't show up? Do you think he'll hurt Ava? That was our deal. I did what he wanted, and he'd save her. He won't hurt her, said James. Through out of the corner of my eye, I saw his grip on the steering wheel tighten. Not if he's any kind of human being. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my sweater. I'm not so sure he is. When I got home, there were 6 messages on my machine. The first was from the school calling to find out where I was, and the next 5 were all from Ava, her tone growing more and more worried with each message. Even though I was exhausted, I called Ava back. It was good to hear her voice despite her being as annoyingly cheerful and talkative as ever. She blabbered on enough for the both of us, and she didn't seem to mind that I barely said a word. Even though James seemed sure nothing would happen to her, I couldn't shake the worry that something might. Even though I'd only known her a few weeks after the incident by the river, I'd felt responsible for her. I couldn't do anything to help my mother, but if something happened to Ava because of me, I couldn't bear it. Ava, I said as we were about to hang up. Yeah, she sounded distracted. Do me a favor and take care of yourself tonight, okay? Don't do anything stupid like climb a ladder or pet a lion. She laughed. Yeah, whatever, I'll call you in the morning. Say hi to your mom for me. After hanging up, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I watched my clock tick over from 11:59 to 12, and a sick sense of dread filled me. What if something happened to Ava? What was I supposed to do with it? It'd be my fault. Against all odds, she had to become my friend, and I was supposed to protect her from that sort of stuff, not deliberately antagonize the man who apparently thought she owed him her life, or thought I owed him mine. I didn't want to think about Henry. I didn't want to think about how he'd brought her back that night at the river, and I didn't want to think about his offer. I tried to picture my mother's face, but the only image I could come up with was the one of her lying in the hospital bed and dying. I rolled over and buried my face in the pillow. There wasn't anything I could do now, and feeling this helpless was gut-wrenching. But I'd already made my decision, and I was going to stick to it. If I had it my way, I would never see Henry again. 7:30, I awoke to a loud banging on my door. I groaned, having fallen asleep shortly after 4, but I couldn't ignore it. Throwing open the door, a string of curses on the tip of my tongue disappeared. It was James, looking like he hadn't slept since the day before. I opened the door, running my fingers through my mess of mousy brown hair. James, what's going on? It's Ava. I froze. She's dead. Okay, I need to check to see if the camera is loaded now. It's at 88%, so I'm going to keep charging it for just a little while. So how about maybe 40 minutes? Chapter 6, Eden Manor. The rumor around town was that she'd had a brain aneurysm, but I knew better. As James drove past the school on our way to the hospital, I saw the entire student body huddled together in the parking lot, hugging each other and sobbing. I couldn't look away. Turn around. What? I said turn around, James, please. And go where? I stared out the window, unable to tear my eyes from their faces. Even the kids who'd hated Ava were crying. I breathed in shallowly, struggling not to do the same. It was my fault. Ava was 17 years old. She'd had her whole life ahead of her, and now she was dead because of me. If he was going to take somebody, why hadn't he taken me? I was the one who stupidly brushed his warning aside, not her. I squeezed my eyes shut once we passed the school. The image of the crowd warring together burned into the back of my eyelids. Was this how it was going to be my whole life? Everyone I knew dying? Would James be next, or would it be mercifully me? Anger swelled up inside of me, engulfing my guilt until I was clutching the armrest so tightly that my nails created permanent half-moon indents in the worn leather. Ava didn't deserve this, and no matter how much Henry had disliked her for the pranks she'd pulled, that didn't give him any right to do this to her family, or to this town. And for what? Because I didn't believe him? Because I didn't want to waste the half of the rest of my life catering to the desires of a lunatic? Is that what he did when he didn't get his way? Throw a tantrum and kill someone? I ignored the little voice in the back of my mind that reminded me Henry was the only reason she'd survived that night by the river in the first place. I couldn't do anything to help my mother, but I could help Ava, and I would fix this. Kate, said James softly, reaching across the seat to set his hand over mine. It's not your fault. The heck it isn't, I snapped, yanking my hand away. She wouldn't be dead right now if it wasn't for me. She would have died weeks ago if it hadn't been for you. No, she wouldn't have, I said. She'd have never tried to pull that stupid prank if I hadn't agreed to go with her. She wouldn't have hit her head if I hadn't moved to Eden. None of this would have happened if I hadn't come here. So because you moved here, it's all your fault. His grip on the wheel tightened in irritation. Ava was the one who drove head first into that river. You were the one who agreed to give up half the rest of your life to keep her alive. You gave her more time, Kate. Don't you get that? What good are a few more weeks? I spat, wiping my cheeks angrily. It's pointless. None of this should have ever happened. Kate, James started, but I turned away again. We were past the school now. Just drive, James, please. Where are we going? If he brought her back to life once, he can do it again. James sighed and said in a voice as soft I wasn't positive I'd heard him right. I'm not sure it works that way. I swallowed thickly. If you ever want to see Ava again, you'd better hope it does. We arrived at the gate 10 minutes later. By that time I was shaking, caught between despair and fury. How dared Henry do this? He had to have known that I hadn't understood or believed in the sorts of things he was talking about, and he'd done it anyway. He had to bring her back. No matter what it took, I would make him do that much. Instead of the gates being locked, as they hadn't been when my mother and I had driven past, they were cracked open wide enough for me to slip through on foot. I glanced at James, not knowing what to say. You shouldn't do this, he said. There's no guarantee he can bring Ava back. And once you go in there, you might not come back out. I don't care. I'll make him fix her. Kate, you know that's impossible. I gritted my teeth. I'll have to try. I can't let her die, James. I can't. She isn't your mother, said James gently. No matter how hard you fight for Ava's life, it won't change what's already happened. It won't save her, and it won't save your mother either. I know that, I choked, though a small part of me wondered if I really did. But I'd already seen Henry perform the impossible once. He could do it again, I was sure of it, and maybe if I did what he wanted, he could save more than Ava this time. This is my choice, and if there's even a chance this can be changed, I'm going to figure out how. Please, I said, my voice faltering, please let me do this. James was quiet for a moment, but at last he nodded, no longer looking at me. Do whatever you have to do. My hands shook as I tried to unfasten my seatbelt. James reached over and did it for me. But what if he's serious, he said. What if he wants you to stay for 6 months? Then I'll do it, I said, staring up the giant gates as a sense of foreboding filled me. I would stay all year if it meant he would save her. Save them. 6 months isn't the end of the world. I'll do whatever I have to do. He nodded once, a distant look in his eyes. I'll be here waiting then, but Kate, he hesitated, do you really think he's what he says he is? My heart pounded. I don't think he's said what he is. James sighed. I was hurting him by doing this, but I had no choice. What do you think he is? I frowned, remembering Ava's words. A very lonely guy. Chances were, if Henry was going to kill me, he'd have already done it. I knew a way out if he really did try to keep me hostage, but if he was going to force me into it, he'd have done that the day before. He really had given me a choice, and so far all I'd done was make the wrong one. I could either accept Ava's death or do something about it, and frankly, I'd had enough of people dying. I wasn't going to let it happen again. Remembering all of the promises I'd made to my mother, I sucked in a deep breath, wishing I could talk to her. She'd know what to do. You'll take care of my mom, won't you? He apparently knew better than to insist she'd still be there when I returned, whenever that might have been. I promise. I'll let school know you won't be coming back, too. Thanks, I said. One less thing to worry about. The steps from the car to the gate were the hardest ones I'd ever taken, but if it meant bringing Ava back, I would surrender my freedom to Henry. He'd been right. I'd nothing else in my life except my mother. Once she was gone, I would be empty, but now I had a chance to trade what was left of my shell of a life for someone who would make the most of it. Ava's life had barely begun. All the best parts of mine were already behind me. My mother wanted me to go out and find happiness, but I couldn't, not without her. At least this way was what was left of me wouldn't go to waste. I walked through the gate and onto the grounds, and immediately the atmosphere changed. It was warmer here, and there was a sort of electricity in the air that I couldn't identify. As I took another few steps, I heard the gate clang shut behind me, and I jumped. Turning around, I saw James standing next to the car, his eyes on me. I waved, and he flashed a pained smile. The road was lined with trees that were evenly spaced, and it sloped upward. It took me a few minutes to walk over the hill, but when I did, I stopped, my mouth agape. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. A huge manor sat sprawled across the ground, so large that I couldn't see what lay behind it. Even from the top of the hill, the road I was on became paved, and it circled around to the front of the manor, forming a perfect oval. I'd only seen buildings like these in pictures of European palaces, and I was sure that nowhere else in the Upper Peninsula, maybe even the entire state, did a place like this exist. It gleamed white and gold, and everything about it looked majestic. As I stood there, it took me a moment to notice that I wasn't alone. A dozen gardeners and workers stared at me, and I suddenly grew self-conscious. I was inside the gate. Now what? In the distance, I saw a woman bustling toward me, holding up the hem of her skirt as she climbed the hill. Rather than taking a step back, I stood my ground, caught between all fear and determination. No matter how beautiful his home was, I still needed to see Henry, and soon. "Welcome, Kate," said the woman, and upon hearing her voice, I did a double-take. "Sophia?" Sure enough, as she drew closer, I recognized her as the day nurse who'd helped me take care of my mother for the past few weeks. I stared at her, shocked, but Sophia acted as if none of this was a big deal. When she reached me, her cheeks were pink and she smiled ear to ear. She took my arm. "We were wondering if you'd ever show, dear. How's your mother?" It took me a second to find my voice. "Dying," I said. "What are you doing here?" "I live here." She started to lead me toward the house, and I let her, trying not to stare. "You know Henry?" "Of course I do," she said. "Everyone knows Henry." "Can you raise the dead too?" I muttered, and Sophia clucked her tongue. "Can you?" I clenched my fist. "I need to see him." "I know, dear. That's where you're headed." I glanced at her, uncertain if she was being patronizing or evasive or both. She ignored my look and led me down the oval drive until we reached the large French double doors, which opened without any prompting from Sophia. Instead of following her inside, I stopped and stared. The outside was nothing compared to the magnificent entrance hall. It was simple and tasteful, not at all gaudy, but it was far from ordinary. The floor was mostly white marble, and I could see a hint of plush carpet on the floor on the other end of the hall. The walls and ceiling were made of mirrors, and they made the massive hall look larger than it already was. But it was the floor in the center of the room that caught my attention. There was a perfect circle made of crystal, and it was by far the most incredible thing about the hall. It shimmered, colors seeming to swim together, blending and dividing as I stared. My mouth hung open, but I didn't care. Everything about it was surreal, and I could hardly believe that I was still standing in Michigan. Kate? I tore myself away and finally paid attention to Sophia. She stood a few feet ahead of me and gave a hesitant smile. Sorry, I said. I walked toward her, stepping around the crystal circle as if it were really water. For all I knew it was. It's just beautiful, she said cheerfully, taking my arm once more and steering me past a grand spiraling staircase that led up to part of the manor I couldn't see. I didn't dare to try to look, not wanting to waste another minute. Yeah, it was the best I could come up with, but I was otherwise speechless. Whatever I'd been expecting, it hadn't been this. She led me through a series of rooms, each uniquely decorated with exquisite. One room was red and gold, another was sky blue with murals painted on the walls. There were sitting rooms, game rooms, studies, and even 2 libraries. It seemed impossible that these were all in the same house and apparently only belonged to one boy, who wasn't much older than me unless his parents lived here too, but it never seemed to end. Finally, we turned down another hall and entered a room with dark green walls and gold trim. The furniture seemed more worn and comfortable here than in the other rooms, and Sophia directed me toward a black leather couch. Sit, dear, and I'll have someone bring you refreshments. Henry should be with you shortly. I sat, not wanting her to leave me alone, but I could do this. I had to. Ava's life was at stake, and this was the only one chance that I'd have to make this argument. If Henry wanted to keep me here, then fine. As long as he brought Ava back, I would do anything he wanted me to do, even if it meant spending the rest of my life behind the hedges. I pushed away what James had said in the car about Ava not being my mother. That wasn't why I was here. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself. Wasn't the mere possibility of Henry being able to save my mother, or somehow save me from the pain of losing her, exactly why I was here? I would do everything I could to save Ava, but she'd been dead for hours, and the entire town knew. Henry would undoubtedly want a steeper price for bringing her back a second time, and no matter what brave face I put on, the thought of staying behind these hedges for the rest of my life terrified me. I'd meant what I'd said about doing everything I could to try to bring her back, but even if that was impossible, like James had said, my mother wasn't dead yet. There was still a chance Henry could do something to save her. I don't know how long I sat there in silence, staring blankly at a bookcase full of leather-bound books. I went over my speech in my head, making sure everything I wanted to say was there. He had to listen to me, didn't he? Even if he didn't want to do it, if I talked long enough, he had to at least hear me. I had to try. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Henry standing in the doorway, holding a tray laden with food. My fingers dug into the sofa, and all the words I'd practiced flew out of my head. Kate, he said in a low, pleasant voice. Stepping aside, he set the tray on the coffee table in front of me and sat on the sofa across from me. Henry, I said, hating myself for stuttering. We need to talk. He inclined his head, as if silently giving me permission to speak. I opened and shut my mouth, not knowing what to say. While he waited, he poured us both a cup of tea. I'd never had tea in a china cup before. I'm sorry, I said, my throat was dry, for not listening to you yesterday, I wasn't thinking, and I didn't think you were serious. My mom's really sick, and Please, I'm here. I'll stay. I'll do whatever you want. Just bring Ava back. He sipped his tea and motioned for me to take mine. I did so with shaking hands. She's 17, I said, my voice growing more desperate by the word. She wouldn't have to miss out on her whole life just because of my stupid mistake. It wasn't your mistake. He set his cup down and focused on me. His eyes were still the same bizarre shade of moonlight, and I squirmed under the intensity of his stare. Your friend made her choice when she decided to jump into that river and abandon you. I do not hold you accountable for your friend's death. You shouldn't either. You don't understand. I didn't know that you were serious. I didn't get it. I didn't know she'd really die. I thought you were kidding, or, I don't know, not kidding, but something. I didn't know you could do that, and now that I do, please. She doesn't deserve to die for making a few mistakes, and you do not deserve to give up half of the rest of your life for her. I sighed, so frustrated that I was close to tears. What did he want from me? You're right, I don't want to stay here. This place terrifies me. You terrify me. I don't know what you are or what this place is, and the last thing I want is to spend the rest of my life here. Maybe Ava wasn't the greatest to me at first, but she's my friend now. She didn't deserve to die, and her death, it's my fault. It should have been me, not her, and I can't live with that. I can't look at myself in the mirror every day knowing it's my fault that her family has to go through the pain of losing her, just like I stopped. Just like I was going through the pain of losing my mother. I can't. So if it means Ava comes back, then I'll stay here for as long as you want. I promise, please. It wasn't exactly the speech I'd planned, but it was close enough. By the time I was through, there were tears in my eyes, and I gripped the teacup so tightly that it was a minor miracle it didn't break. In front of me, Henry was silent, staring into his own cup of tea. I didn't have the faintest idea what he was thinking, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. All that mattered was that he agreed. You would willingly give up 6 months a year for the rest of your life in order to save your friend, even after what she did to you? There was a note of incredulity in his tone. What she did doesn't deserve a death sentence, I said. There are a lot of people out there who loved her, and they shouldn't have to hurt like that because of me. And maybe knowing I'd saved her would help me hurt a little less, too. He drums his fingers against the armrest of the sofa, his eyes on me once again. Kate, I do not invite just anyone into my home. Do you understand why I offered this to you? Because he was crazy? I shook my head. Because even though she had abandoned you, instead of feeling spiteful or allowing her to die, you did everything within your power, including face one of your greatest fears, to save her. I didn't know what to say to that. Wouldn't anyone? No. His smile was weary. Very few would even consider it. You are rare, and you intrigue me. When you declined my offer yesterday, I thought perhaps I was wrong, but by coming here today you have only proved yourself even more worthy and capable than I could have imagined. I blinked, alarmed. Worthy and capable of what? He ignored my question. I will make my offer only once more. In return, I cannot give you your friend's life back. She is gone, and I am afraid that if I returned her to her body now, she would be something unnatural, and she would never find happiness, but I promise you that as she is now, she is content. My chest felt hollow. So it's all for nothing, then? No. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. I cannot undo what has already been done, but I can prevent. Prevent what? He stared at me, and with a rush of hope I understood. I thought I would be the one to bring it up, but he'd done it for me. He could stop my mother from dying. You can really do that? He hesitated. Yes, I can. I cannot heal your mother, but I can keep her alive until you are ready to say goodbye. I can give you the chance to spend more time with her, and when you are ready, I will make sure that it is peaceful. His words settled over me, enveloping me in a strange warmth. How? I whispered. He shook his head. Don't worry yourself about that. If you agree, you would have my word that I will uphold my end of our deal. I'd always thought that I'd get to say goodbye to my mother. None of the scenarios I'd played out in my head involved her falling into a coma and slipping away without me getting to tell her I'd loved her one last time. And now... Okay, I said softly. You keep her alive. She has a really aggressive kind of cancer, so it might be difficult. Suddenly it was hard to see with the way my eyes were swimming in tears. But she won't be in any pain, right? I want to be able to say goodbye. She won't be in any pain. I will make sure of it. He smiled sadly. Is there anything else you would like? You are giving up much more than I am, and I want you to be certain. I swallowed. You can't keep her alive? You can't heal her? I'm sorry, he said, but goodbyes aren't forever. The love you have for your mother isn't the sort that death can reach. I ducked my head and stared into my tea, not wanting them to see me fall apart. I don't know who I am without her. Then you will have a chance to find out before she goes. Henry set down his cup, and when you say your goodbyes, she will have peace of mind knowing you will be all right. I nodded, my throat too tight for me to speak. For her then, too. She wanted me to be all right, and that wasn't something I could promise her yet. But the chance to have one more conversation to tell her I loved her one last time, and the glimmer of hope that I would be able to look at her in the eye and promise that I would be okay, so she could let go without worry and guilt. It was worth it. Then it is done, said Henry gently. You will be my guest for the winter. Sophia will escort you to your room, and nothing will be asked of you until tomorrow. Again I nodded. This was it, then. I was trapped. This would be my home for the next 6 months. Suddenly the room seemed much smaller than it had before. Henry, I said with a squeak. Yes? Did Sophia know this was going to happen? Henry eyed me for several seconds, as if trying to decide whether or not I would believe him. We've been watching you, yes. I didn't dare ask who we were. What is this place? He looked amused. Have you not figured it out already? I felt my cheeks color. At least there was some blood left in my head, which meant I had a chance at standing without passing out. I'd been a little busy thinking about other stuff. Getting to his feet, Henry offered me his hand. I didn't take it, but it didn't seem to bother him. It goes by many names: Elysium, Anwen, Paradise. Some even call it the Garden of Eden. He smiled as if he'd told a clever little joke. I didn't get it, and my confusion must have shown because he continued without me asking. This is the gate between the living and the dead, he said. You are still living. The others on the grounds died a very long time ago. A chill ran through me. And you? Me. The corner of his mouth twitched. I rule the dead. I am not one of them. So 20 more minutes. Chapter 7, The Impossible. My rooms were surprisingly comfortable. Unlike the rest of the house, they didn't seem to be too preoccupied with making sure everyone was walking through them knew they were part of a very rich and powerful household. Instead, my suite was relatively modest, the only real luxury being the bed, which was huge and canopied, and exactly the sort I'd always dreamed of having. Part of me wondered if Henry had known that too. Everyone seemed to know I was there, as if I were someone famous. I heard whispers and giggles every now and then from the other side of my door, and whenever I looked out the huge bay window, I could see some of the grounds workers staring up at me, like they knew I was watching them. I didn't like being a topic of gossip, but there wasn't a whole lot I could do about it except close the curtains and bury my head in a pile of pillows. The day passed quickly, and it wasn't long before Sophia brought me dinner. I was still annoyed that she hadn't warned me that she was part of this earlier, so I muttered my thanks without looking at her and refused to answer any of her questions. How I was doing wasn't exactly a secret anyway. After she left, I picked at the food, too worried about what was going to happen in the morning to eat. While I wasn't confined to my room, there wasn't much else for me to do, at least not for now. Not when I knew how easy it would be for me to get lost. But no matter how nice the room was, or how kind the staff was, or how good the food tasted, the fact remained that I was essentially a prisoner. I thought of James and wondered how long he'd waited at the gate and whether or not he'd gone to see my mother afterward. 6 months seemed to stretch on forever in front of me, the end nowhere in sight. Would he keep his promise? Would he be there when this was over? Or would he have moved on? Deep inside, I knew he would be there. I didn't deserve a friend like him. But would my mother still be there at the end, too? Would Henry keep his promise? Was he even capable of it? I wanted to believe him, to believe that that sort of thing was possible, because if he really could keep her alive, then maybe I'd never have to say goodbye, not until it was my time to die, too. Or maybe he'd be able to keep her alive long enough for them to find a cure. I couldn't save Ava, but there was still hope for my mother, and no matter what it cost me, it would be worth it. I didn't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in Eden Manor anymore. Instead, I was lying on a blanket in the middle of Central Park and staring up at a cloudless summer sky, the heat of the sun on my face. I sat up, confused, and looked around. There was a picnic basket next to me, and other people were scattered around the grass enjoying themselves. Sheep Meadow. It was my favorite spot in the entire park, within view of the lake, but far enough away from the worst of the tourist traps. But it didn't feel gimmicky. My mother and I hadn't been able to come here in years. I started to stand, determined to figure out what was going on when my mouth dropped open. My mother, looking as healthy as she had 10 years ago, long before the cancer set in, walked up the gentle slope wearing a long flowing skirt and pleasant bows I hadn't seen her in since she grew too thin to wear it. "Mom?" She smiled, a real smile, not the sickly smile or the smile she put on when she was trying to hide how much pain she was in. "Hello, sweetheart." She sat next to me and kissed my cheek. I was still for a moment, too stunned to move, and when it finally sank in that she was here, healthy and glowing, and my mother again, I threw my arms around her, hugging her tightly and inhaling her familiar scent. Apples and freesia. She was no longer frail, and she wrapped her arms around me with equal strength. "What's going on?" I said, struggling to keep my eyes dry. "We're having a picnic." She released me and began to unpack the basket. It was full of my favorite foods from when I'd been a child: peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, sliced tangerines, macaroni and cheese packed in plastic containers, and enough chocolate pudding to serve a small army. Best of all, she pulled out a box of baklava just the way she always made it. I watched in amazement, wondering what I'd done to deserve such an amazing dream, even though it felt too real to be one. I could sense each blade of grass underneath my hands, and the warm breeze brushed the ends of my hair against my bare arms. It was like we were actually there. And then a thought wormed its way through my mind, and I looked at her suspiciously. "Did Henry bring you here?" Her smile widened. "He's lovely, isn't he?" I gulped a lungful of air, and all the bad thoughts I'd ever had about Henry flew out of my head. He kept his promise. More than that, he could really do it. "Is this a dream, then, or is it real?" She gave me a container of macaroni, along with a look that only my mother could pull off. "Is there some rule that I don't know about that means it can't be both?" A sense of irrational hope filled me. "Is he really what he says he is?" "And what would that be?" she said, unwrapping a sandwich. I blurted out everything that had happened since we arrived in Eden, seeing Henry after nearly crashing into an imaginary cow, the night, the river, and how he'd seemingly resurrected Ava, the deal I'd made, and the way James had tried to stop me from taking it, the visit from Henry, and Ava dying the next day, my decision to go to Eden Manor to try to save her, and finally the deal I'd made with Henry that had gotten me this. Suddenly staying with him for 6 months didn't seem nearly as bad, not if I got to see my mother every night. "Curious," she said, though her eyes were sparkling with amusement. I didn't see anything funny about the situation. I wish you'd told me all of this earlier, Kate. I'm sorry, I said, my cheeks flushing as I stared down at my hands. I thought I was going crazy or something. Hardly. She reached out and cupped my chin, guiding it upward until I was looking at her. Promise me you'll tell me everything that happens from now on, will you? I don't want to miss anything. I nodded. More time with her. It was all I could possibly ask for. Mom, I said in a small voice. I love you, she smiled. I know, sweetheart. When I woke up the next morning, at first I didn't know where I was. The heat of the sun from my dream still lingered on my skin, and I opened my eyes, half expecting to see my mother standing over me, but it was only the canopy of my bed. Groaning, I sat up and blinked the sleep out of my eyes. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, after a long moment the day before came flooding back to me, along with the deal I'd made with Henry, and my heart skipped a beat. So it hadn't been just a dream after all. Do you think she's awake now? She ought to be, yeah? If she wasn't, she certainly is now. I froze. The whispers were coming from the other side of the curtains hanging from my bed, and they weren't voices I recognized. At first was bright and bubbly, the second made it sound like whoever it belonged to wanted to be anywhere but here. I couldn't blame her. What do you think she's like? Better than the last one, yeah? Anyone's better than the last one. Now shut up before you really do wake her up. I sat there for a long moment trying to absorb what I was hearing. I locked the door the night before, I was sure of it, so how had they gotten in there? And what did they mean by the last one? Before I could speak, my stomach growled, loudly, the sort of epic loud that makes everyone in class turn around and giggle while you duck in your seat and try not to turn red. Whatever chance I had at eavesdropping was gone thanks to my traitorous belly. She's awake, the curtain snapped open, and I shielded my eyes from the morning light. Oh, she's pretty. And brunette. Haven't had one of those in decades. Thanks, I guess, I mumbled, with the sun shining in my eyes. I couldn't see who I was talking to. Who are you? Calliope. This was the one who spoke in exclamation points, the one who'd called me pretty. I pried my eyelids open just enough to get a decent look at her, smaller than me with blonde hair that hung past her waist, and a round face that flushed pink with happiness. She looked so excited that I was afraid she'd topple over. Ella, said the second girl dully. Still squinting, I got a good look at her, and felt a stab of jealousy. Dark hair, tall, impossibly beautiful, and she looked bored to tears. And you're Catherine, said Calliope. Sophia told us all about you, how you came here to help your friend, and how you're staying with us for 6 months, and... Calliope, stop it, you're scaring her. I didn't know if scaring was technically the right word, but it worked for now. As Calliope bounced up and down, getting closer to me with each move she made, I started to lean back. Her exuberance was intimidating. Oh, Calliope took a step back, blushing again. Sorry, are you hungry? Deep breath, I thought. In and out, and maybe things would start to make sense. She needs to get dressed first, said Ella, moving toward an armoire. Catherine, what's your favorite color? Kate, call me Kate, I said through gritted teeth. It was too early in the morning for this, and I didn't have one. You don't have a favorite color? Said Calliope disbelievingly as she moved to help Ella. I stood and stretched, unable to see what exactly they were doing. Both of them stood in front of the armoire, which looked as if it were chock full of clothing. Not today, I said, irritated. I can dress myself, you know. Ella and Calliope wrestled something long and blue and soft from the crush of clothing. They both turned toward me, holding, oh no. Unless you've some sort of inhuman ability to lace yourself up into a corset, dressing yourself isn't an option, said Ella, her eyes glinting. I didn't know if it was out of amusement or malevolence, quite possibly both. They held up a blue dress that was so low-cut not even Ava would have touched it. The sleeves were long and narrow, fanning out just toward the end, and there was lace. Lace! My eyes widened. You can't be serious. You don't like it? Calliope frowned and ran a hand over the soft fabric. What about something yellow? You look nice in yellow. I don't wear dresses, I said through a clenched jaw. Ever. Ella snorted. I don't care, because you do now. I'm in charge of your wardrobe, and unless you want to wear what you have on now until you stink so badly that no one comes near you, you're wearing this. I stared at the blue monstrosity. I'm not your doll. You can't make me play dress-up. Yes, I can, said Ella, and I will. I've got thousands of years of fashion to choose from, and I can make your life a nightmare if you try to fight it. Ever try to sit down in a hoop skirt? She gave me a pointed look. Behave, and I might consider giving you a day off every once in a while. But this is my choice, not yours. You gave up yours the moment you agreed to stay here. Besides, everyone wears dresses here, said Calliope brightly. You can't say you don't like it until you give it a chance. Ella offered me the dress. Your choice, expensive, comfortable dresses you won't notice in a day or two, or jeans that'll stand up on their own in a week. Letting out a growl in the back of my throat, I snatched it from her and stormed into the bathroom. She could make me wear it, but that didn't mean I had to like it. Lacing me up took nearly 20 minutes, and that was without a corset. That's where I drew the line, and Ella wasn't stupid enough to try to force me into that, too. The dresses fit me well without me suffocating myself, and that was good enough. I didn't need to have my chest forced up to my chin in the meantime. Once they'd finished dressing me, Calliope sat me down and fussed with my mousy hair for a few minutes. She hummed as she worked, and any questions I tried to ask were either ignored or cut off by random bursts of song, just as I started to wonder if it would never end. She announced that I was done and breakfast was ready. Breakfast! I was so ravenous that I didn't even object as they forced my feet into a pair of heeled shoes. We would talk about those later, especially if I was expected to do stairs, but for now, as long as there was a promise of food, I'd put up with it. Still feeling lost, I followed them out of the room, wishing I understood more about what was going on. Was this how every morning was going to go? Or would I eventually be allowed to dress myself? Were they supposed to be my friends like Calliope seemed to want to be? Or were they supposed to keep an eye on me to make sure I didn't escape? They weren't my most pressing questions, but those answers I suspected were ones only Henry could give me. In the meantime, there is still one response Calliope and Ella owed me. Calliope, I said as she and Ella led me through the maze of rooms and corridors. Supposedly there was a breakfast room in the massive manor, but I wasn't so sure I believed them. It felt like we'd been wandering for hours. What did you mean when you asked if I were better than the last one? She gave me a blank look. The last one? When you guys thought I was sleeping, you mentioned me being better than the last one. What last one? Calliope thought for a moment before realization dawned on her. Oh, the last one, the last girl, I mean. The last one Henry had here. There was another girl? How long ago was that? Calliope exchanged a look with Ella, who remained silent. 20 years, maybe? So apparently Henry had a toddler last time, unless he was telling the truth about ruling the dead, but I wasn't quite ready to accept that. Why do I need to be here, then? Why isn't she here anymore? Because she did. Ella slapped her hand over Calliope's mouth, so hard that the sound reverberated through the room. Because she isn't, said Ella sharply. It isn't our job to explain this to you, Catherine. If you want to know why you're here, ask Henry. And you, she glared at Calliope. Oh, I said softly, as another thought occurred to me. He said everyone here was dead. Is that true? Are you two? Neither Ella nor Calliope seemed surprised by my question. Instead, Ella pulled her hand away, letting Calliope answer. Everyone's dead here, yes, she said, rubbing her cheek and giving Ella a dirty look. Or like Henry, never alive in the first place. When were you, born? Calliope sniffed. A lady doesn't reveal her age. Ella snorted, and Calliope glared at her. Ella is so old. She doesn't even know what year she was born, said Calliope, as if that were something to be ashamed of. I shook my head, speechless, not knowing if I was really supposed to believe all of this or not. Ella said nothing. Instead, she pushed open another door, finally revealing a long room with a table so large it could have easily seated 30. My head was spinning from Calliope's story, and it took me a moment to realize the room was already filled with people. Your court, said Ella dryly. Servants, tutors, anyone you'll ever have contact with. They all wanted to meet you. I stopped dead in the doorway, feeling the blood drain from my face. There were dozens of pairs of eyes staring at me, and suddenly I was painfully self-conscious. Are they going to stay here while I eat? I whispered. I couldn't think of a better way of making sure I didn't eat a thing. I can send them away if you like, said Calliope, and I nodded. She skipped forward, and with two claps of her hands, most of them began to file out. A few who'd handled the food remained, along with two men standing off to the side, each accessorized with formidable weapons. The tall blonde was so still he might have been a statue, and the brunette fidgeted, as if standing still and being silent was something he wasn't very good at. He couldn't have been older than 20. You will always be guarded, said Ella, and I looked at her, startled. She must have seen me staring. She moved forward with the grace of a deer and gestured to a place at the foot of the table. Your seat. I followed her, trying hard not to trip on the hem of my long dress, and sat down. Now there were only about a dozen people in the room, but they were still all looking at me. Your breakfast, Your Highness, said a man, stepping forward to set a covered plate in front of me. Ella lifted the cover, not giving me the chance to do so myself. She looked as bored as she had in my room. Thanks, I said, bewildered. Your Highness? I picked up a fork, prepared to spear a piece of fruit and eat it, but a pale hand snatched my wrist before I could do it. I looked up, surprised to see Calliope standing over me, her blue eyes wide. I taste first, she insisted. It's what I'm supposed to do. Shocked, I blurted, You test my food? When you decide to eat, yes, she said timidly. I tested your dinner last night too, but you don't have to eat while you're here. You know, eventually you'll forget what it feels like. If you want to, though, I have to. No, I said, pushing my chair back so loudly it squealed against the marble floor. The stress of the day before and the confusion of that morning came crashing down on me, shattering every last bit of self-control I had. No, this isn't going to happen. It's ridiculous. Food tasters? Armed guards? Your Highness? Why? What am I supposed to be doing here? Everyone seemed stunned by my outburst, and it was several moments before anyone spoke. When they did, it was Ella. You agreed to stay here for 6 months out of the year, yes? Yes, I said, frustrated. They didn't understand. But I didn't agree to food tasters or any of this. You did, she said calmly. It's part of the deal. Why? No one answered me. I clenched my skirt so tightly that I thought it would rip. Let me see Henry, I said. I want to talk to him. The silence was deafening, and something inside me snapped. Let me talk to him. I'm here. The sound of his voice, low and smooth, startled me. Whirling around, I managed to lose my balance, barely catching myself on the chair. Henry stood in front of me, much closer than I expected. His young and flawless face was blank, and my heart skipped a beat. When I managed to regain my voice, it came out as more of a squeak, but I didn't care. I wanted answers. Why? I said. Why am I here? I'm not your princess, and I didn't sign up for any of this, so why is it happening? Henry offered me his hand, and I hesitated but finally took it. His skin felt surprisingly warm against mine. I don't know what I'd been expecting. Ice, maybe, not heat, not any evidence of life. Close your eyes, he murmured, and I did. A moment later, I felt a cool breeze against my cheek, and my eyes flew open. We were outside, in the middle of an elaborate and well-tended garden, with quiet fountains scattered throughout the flowers and hedges. A stone path led up from where we stood to the back of the manor, which loomed in the distance an easy half a mile away. Cerberus, the large dog from the forest, trotted up to greet Henry and gave him a good scratch behind the ears. My stomach dropped to my knees, and any color that was left drained from my cheeks. How did you? In time, he said. Numbly, I sat down on the edge of the fountain. You said yesterday that you did not want to do this, and I do not blame you. Now that the deal has been made, however, it cannot be undone. You showed courage the night you saved your friend's life, and I ask that you find it within yourself once more. I took a deep breath, trying to find an ounce of that so-called courage he was convinced I had. All I could find was fear. Back in Eden, you said if I read the myth of Persephone, I'd understand what you wanted, I said in a shaking voice. My friend James told me she was the queen of the underworld, and I read it as a book when I shook my head. It wasn't important. Is that true? He nodded. She was my wife. Was? She existed? Yes, he said, his voice softer. She died many years ago. How? Henry's expression was blank. She fell in love with a mortal, and after he died, she chose to join him. I did not stop her. There were so many parts of that statement that I didn't understand that I wasn't sure where to begin. But she's a myth. It isn't possible she really existed. Maybe, he said, his gaze distant, but if it is happening, who's to say what's possible and what isn't? Logic, I said, the laws of nature, rationality, some things just aren't possible. Then tell me, Kate, how did we get outside? I looked around again, half expecting it to fade away like some elaborate illusion. You knocked me out and brought me out here? I offered weakly, or perhaps there was a trapdoor that you did not see. He reached out to take my head, and I stiffened. Sighing, he brushed his fingers against mine and then pulled away. There is always a rational explanation, but sometimes things may seem irrational or impossible if you don't know all the rules. So what? I said. You're telling me that a Greek god just happened to build a manor in the middle of the woods in a country halfway across the world? When you have eons to live, the world becomes a much smaller place, he said. I have homes in many countries, including Greece, but I favor the solitude here. It is peaceful, and I enjoy the seasons and the long winter. I sat very still, not knowing what to say to that. Could you try to believe me? He said, just for now, even if it means pushing aside everything you've learned. Would you please do me the favor of trying to accept what I am telling you, no matter how improbable it may seem? Pressing my lips together, I looked down at my hands. Is that what you do? Play make-believe? No, I could hear the smile in his voice. But you may, if you'd like, if it will make it easier on you. This wasn't going to go away, even if it was all a big trick. If everything was planned out from the beginning to make me look like a fool or whatever his endgame was, then all I could do was wait for the punchline. But the image of Ava lying in a pool of her own blood with her skull bashed in floated in my mind, as did the feeling of the cool breeze across my cheek when only moments before we'd been in the heart of the manor. And my mother, alive and well in Central Park. Whatever was going on, sooner or later I'd have to face the fact that it wasn't anything I'd ever experienced before. All right, I said, let's pretend this really is paradise and everyone's dead, And Ella and Calliope are 1,000,000 years old, and you're really who you say you are. I do not claim to be anyone except for me, he said, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. I made a face. Fine, then let's pretend this is all real, that magic is possible and the Tooth Fairy exists. And somewhere down the line, I didn't hit my head and you aren't certifiably insane. What does your wife dying have to do with me? Henry was silent for a long moment. As I said, she chose to die rather than to stay with me. I was her husband, but she simply loved him more. Judging by his pained expression, there was nothing simple about it, but I didn't press him. You know, you look way too young to have been married, right? I said in a sorry attempt to lighten the mood. How old are you anyway? The corners of his lips twitched again. Older than I look. After a moment he added, she may have loved me, but it was never her choice. It was my last gift to her, letting her go. There was a note of sadness in his voice that I understood all too well. I'm sorry, I said. I am. I still don't understand why I'm here. I have been ruling on my own for nearly 1,000 years, but a century ago I agreed to only 100 more before my brothers and sisters take my realm from me. I cannot handle it on my own, not any more. There are simply too many for me to do it alone. I have been searching for a partner ever since, and you are the last one, Kate. This spring the final decision will be made. If you are accepted, you will rule with me as my queen for 6 months of the year. If you do not, you will return to your old life with no memory of this time. Is that what happened to the others? I said, forcing the question past my dry lips. The others, he focused on something in the distance. I do not mean to scare you, Kate, but I will never lie to you. I need you to trust me. And I need you to understand that you are special. I had given up before you came along. I clasped my hands together to keep them from shaking. What happened to them? Some of them went mad. Others were sabotaged. None of them reached the end, let alone pass the tests. Tests? I stared at him. Sabotaged? If I knew more, I would tell you, but it is why we have taken such extreme precautions to protect you. He hesitated. As for the tests, there will be 7 of them, and they will be the basis on which it will be decided if you are worthy of ruling. I didn't agree to any tests, I paused. What happens if I pass? He stared at his hands. You will become one of us. Us? Dead, you mean? No, that is not what I mean. Think, you know the myth. Do you not? Who is Persephone? What was she? Fear stabbed me, cutting me from inside. If what he claimed was true, then he'd kidnapped Persephone and forced her to marry him, and no matter what he said, I couldn't help but wonder if he would try to do the same to me, but the rational part of me couldn't look past the obvious. You really think you're a god? You know that sounds crazy, right? I am aware of how it must sound to you, said Henry. I have done this before, after all, but yes, I am a god. An immortal, if you will. A physical representation of an aspect of this world, and as long as it exists, so will I. If you pass, that is what you will become as well. Feeling dizzy, I stood as quickly as I could while still in those darned heels. Listen, Henry, this all sounds great and everything, but what you're telling me is from a myth that people made up thousands of years ago. Persephone never existed, and even if she did, she wasn't a god because there's no such thing. How do you wish for me to prove it? He stood with me. I don't know, I said, faltering. Do something godlike. I thought I already had. The fire in his eyes didn't fade. There may be things I cannot tell you, but I am not a liar, and I will never mislead you. I shrank back from the intensity of his voice. He really did believe that he was saying. It's impossible, I said softly. Isn't it? But it is happening, so maybe it is time for you to reevaluate what is possible and what is not. I thought about kicking off my heels, heading down the path to the front gate, and leaving, but the thought of my dream with my mother stopped me. As the part of me that wanted to stay for her overruled my skepticism, the temperature dipped 20 degrees and I shivered. Kate? I froze, my feet glued to the ground. I knew that voice, and after yesterday I'd never expected to hear it again. Anything is possible if you give it a chance, said Henry, focusing on something over my shoulder. I whirled around. Not 10 feet away from us stood Ava. Okay, I need to check the camera to see if it has finished charging. Oh, it's finished charging. Okay. That means I'm going to be busy for the next 2 hours. and I'm going to stream more, probably after the 2 hours, or I might even sleep after that and come back tomorrow. But let me read the chat. Hello. Hello. I'm going to come back after 2 hours. I've got laughter in the dark probably the rest of the way. Like, if you can see, I've got I read about half of it today, so I'm going to read the rest of that, and then I'll probably come back after. Or I might take a break after for a little while to sleep, maybe. I don't know. Thank you for listening. I will probably read in 2 hours or something. Thank you for listening. Good night.